My my experience, as in this audio.
No, not you. These guys. Yeah, the audio.
I'm like, it's fine.
Yeah, that's why you're having a fine time with the audio. Cool. Okay, so Soren just did the thing that I was trying to say when I was muted, which was I wanted chat to tell me if they could hear me, and Soren told me he couldn't hear me without me being able to hear me ask for that. So this is an extreme level of sync. Okay, so I'm gathering, Soren, that it's audible now. I'll also check myself. Loud and clear, and is Pamela loud and clear also? And whenever you're
Hey, yeah. Do I sound okay? Am I right?
Okay, yeah. I just did a little check. I think you sound good.
Okay.
Perfect. Sweet. All right, smooth so far. Well, I just woke up from a nap. I'm slowly becoming fully conscious. There we go. Nice.
So, does this work best if I look at us here in the Discord, or should I be looking at Twitch and looking at the chat? Or will you be looking at the chat?
Probably for both looking at chat. That's best.
Okay. Oh, okay. There's the video. Yeah, you put it on over here. So.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. So you'll see me delayed, but I'll make it work. Okay, sweet. No, we're set up. We're good to go. The first thing that we want to do, Pamela, before anything else, is pick a plane and a flight path that we want to do.
Okay.
So we can go anywhere in the world. We've been to a bunch of places already. So if you were going to pick New York, we've been in New York like 3 times. So we can always do it again. But we can go anywhere in the world, and it's your choice.
I don't even know where this canal is. Maybe we should go there.
Yo, should we go to the Suez Canal? That's actually a good idea.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, and Lithros is my trusted supporter on this channel, who unfortunately is sick. But usually he tells me where the airports are to go see the stuff. I mean, I think it's here, right? I'm gonna zoom in. Let's look up an airport nearby the Suez Canal. Cairo is closest. Am I gonna have to
Hell yeah! That's what I'm talking about.
Get like an actual like? Am I gonna actually have to know where I'm going? HEPS. Port Said. Maybe we try that. That looks. Oh, we went to Chaos Prime. Wait a second. You have a show? You were on my show. Wait, hold on. I'm thinking about too many things at once. Okay, fuck it. Let's do this. And then where should we go? I don't know, like south. Does that sound good, Pamela?
Yeah, I'm in for it.
Okay, cool. Sorry, get this right. Oh, on this show. Oh yeah, no, we did do pyramids when Chaos Prime was on. HEPS, Port Said, departure, arrival. I don't know. Just pick like there. And Pamela, we have to pick a plane. So I will tell you the categories of planes. And I'm also going to turn you up slightly. The planes we have available are fighter jets. We have big planes like Airbus type planes. There are little propeller planes, which are slow and cute but ineffective. And there are also jets, which are classy and small. And then there's a couple of very odd planes. Any preferences among those categories, or does anything catch your eye?
Let's do something weird.
Something weird?
Yeah. What are these? So just choose one of these little wacky ones.
Little wacky.
There was a little blue one. back a bit.
We can take
Yeah.
the ramen. It's definitely one of the worst ones, but we can take it. let's go on the ramen, and then later I'll switch to the fighter jet, and
Yeah, right.
and then show you what you're missing. But let's do the ramen. Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Let me just find my controller, and then we'll get ready to go. Pamela, I was eating dinner today.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taking pictures of my food like I normally do. And I thought to myself, maybe I should have her guess the calorie amounts of the food I ate. But then I was like, I shouldn't be. The real reason was that I was lazy and didn't want to look it up. Not that I thought it would be a good contribution to the show. So I didn't really prepare that. But
Yeah, I don't know how I've learned how to count calories like somewhat accurately. I just kept hearing that people undercount them like so badly that I just kept adjusting, and then like corrected it. So I guess that's one bias you can correct if you really want to.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I've been doing this crazy diet. I've been counting calories for like 7 weeks, and Pamela has a unique ability to spot foods and then say the number. Kind of like The Price is Right, I guess. So, by the way, if you're curious, we are going to be flying over Bing Maps, just a bit on like how the game works or whatever. That's us, I guess. And it's an actual like life-sized map, world-sized. You know, like the Earth. You can hear me, right? There's no issue.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to get us off the ground. I think I can see where the canal is. And the Nile River looks like a flower. So there we go. All right, we're up. Beautiful. Right. I think I can see that there's a canal to our south, so I'm going to slowly start making our way towards it, but I'm very bad at this game where we might crash. Hey, Maybe Gray is here. Hello, Maybe.
Hello.
So Pamela, you were telling me that you were just likely putting kids to bed and quite possibly fried from that. How are you doing?
Yeah, it was okay tonight. They were about to go to bed, and the middle one shoved the little one down, and he like hit his head right on the ground and started screaming, which is like a totally ordinary occurrence, but it just all that noise like at what's supposed to be winding down in the end of the day is like you never get used to it. So it was okay, but this bedtime was a little wilder than usual because my mother-in-law just rolled into town, so they were really hyped up and like saw her, and then she left. So anything that like is in the evening just can throw them off. But I mean, adults are the same way. Adults, like, you know, you go out and you're like all hyped up and then you can't sleep even though you're tired. It's very normal.
Right. I mean, I think my whole like first 20 years of my life was maybe 15 is to be more fair to myself, was my mom telling me this is affecting your state and you don't know it, and me being like, no, it's not. And it was often like, you're hungry is one. What else? Yeah, you didn't sleep, you didn't this, you didn't that. But I think as I got older, I started learning that it was like true.
Yeah, it's totally true, even if you don't like to hear it. I have one kid who's a very like selective eater, and they kind of come and go in phases, but we tell her sometimes, we're like, you are losing it because you've eaten like 2 Goldfish crackers this whole day, and anyone would be losing it. And then of course that turns the eating into like this whole big power struggle on top of that. She doesn't like a lot of foods, and it doesn't really help, but it's so hard not to say when it's like, that's obviously what's wrong. And I mean, this is something that people try to do even when they're trying to like self-parent or self-reparent, is like really go back to basics. Like, have you cared for yourself? Nothing expensive or fancy, like in even the most very basic ways. And a lot of times it's just like not true. This is where all these tweets are coming from. This is becoming like a genre. All these tweets that are like, I thought that I was worried about the meaning of life, but it turns out I needed a glass of water.
Right, I was hungry.
10 of these, yeah.
I was dehydrated.
Yeah, it's like, I've been meaning to write a blog post about this actually. I think it's going to be called Incommensurate Solutions, right? Which is that what's in the water is not the meaning of life, but it like cross solves to some extent. And a lot of people's first experience with like an incommensurate solution is they start working out, and there's nothing in the gym that like makes you not die or not have moral quandaries or whatever, but it can really lighten those things. And so, yeah, I need to write that one maybe later this week.
The I hate to bring up Mishima every episode. Have you ever had the chance to at least see the whole social phenomenon around this guy, Yukio Mishima?
Yeah, Burn.
Yeah.
You guys probably see my husband around Twitter. Yeah, Burns told me about him.
Yeah, oh, sorry, someone's telling me put flaps up. Sorry, really quick, we got to make sure this thing. That's the trick. See, it's kind of like a metaphor. You're flying with your flaps down, and then you work out a little bit, and suddenly... Okay, because I'm trying to get altitude here. I'm hovering around. I'm getting a little bit of altitude. We're slowly going up. Very slowly. All right. Thank you, guys. Yeah. I guess, so let's talk about some of that. So, like, so what you do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do? I think probably a bunch of people here know what you do, but just kind of your version.
Yeah, so I'm essentially a philosopher. About 2 years ago, I put up a shingle calling myself the life coach for smart people, which obviously is like so tongue-in-cheek. And I think, I've been working with clients at a pretty good pace ever since then, and their problems range from sort of like productivity stuff, but they don't want to go to like some productivity guru with like a bunch of weird random tips and tricks. They sort of like my vibe, so they come to me instead. That's the productivity end of the spectrum, or like little things, all the way to like, I have an existential crisis. I don't know what to do with it. Can we talk? And most people's problems are somewhere in between. I have a blog post about this you could look up. It's called The Existential Sandwich. And it's sort of, it's about the way that when people start talking about their problems, they're like, oh, I've been procrastinating and I just need like a way to find this project that's taking forever, because really, actually, I'm terrified that my time on earth is finite and that I've spent some of it poorly. And that's like the existential core, right? And then when they wrap up talking, the other layer of the sandwich is just, but really, like, if I just don't finish this project, like, I'm going to get fired, right? So there's your sandwich. And so you kind of have to find ways to take it piece by piece. Anyway, so I've been doing this sort of like oddball work for a couple of years now. And the incommensurate solutions is definitely something that I've noticed more than once. And the question people have around that, once you get past the joke phase, which is like, I drank the water, I feel better, is like, especially with the gym.
Yeah.
The question is like, is it okay? Is it okay that what I did to lighten the situation was not direct? Like, is it okay that I didn't actually make progress on the meaning of life, that I was just dehydrated? And that's the thing that I don't know that there are like hard and fast rules for. Like maybe it's something where you weren't going to make progress on it, and the problem actually was that your animal was sort of out of state. Or maybe it'll come back later. I mean, stuff like that does.
Sorry, I'm like choking on the water now. I'm thinking about how the metaphor is extending, and I'm like, stop thinking about that. Just try to drink the water. By the way, I think we're above. I think there's consensus in the chat that we are above the canal. We're above the Suez Canal. So It's like a big straight river. It's kind of awesome. Let me ask you about what you said and make sure I understood what you said. You were saying something about like, is it okay that I didn't make progress on the big thing? Can you say more about that? Like what that is?
Yeah. So people often notice this. That's what they're joking about in these tweets. They notice that their problem got lighter or it became less urgent or whatever, but that it was not directly addressed. So,
right.
And so I think for people who are like outside my target market, it's like, great. Okay. So you felt a lot of dread and then you like got more exercise and stopped like eating so much sugar and putting your blood glucose in the ditch. And so now you feel better. So like done.
Uh-huh.
But to like a thinky person, they notice this happening and they're like, didn't I just like sort of distract myself? Or like, isn't it a problem that I didn't address it in the appropriate way, even though I happen to feel better? And that's something that I think is very hard to make like an overarching guideline about. I mean, sometimes maybe it's fine. Sometimes maybe it's not. That's like what we would talk about.
Right. It's interesting because one view is sort of that the crisis, the big picture crisis, is just the signal that your body's sending, like merely the signal that your body's sending that it's not in a good state or something like that. Versus you're really having a crisis of existential variety, and what does that mean? Plus, it's good to take care of your body. Or it's sort of, I feel like there's like different perspectives there.
Yeah. So it could be that the initial thing that you thought was a problem was actually you misinterpreted in some sense, and that its origin was actually that your body needed something that it wasn't getting or whatever. I think usually there's some element of both, like that you care about what the meaning of life is and you weren't getting any exercise or any sleep or whatever.
Right.
But part of why it's important to use the incommensurate solution, even if it's not a total solution, is because people tend not to be receptive to like new ways of thinking or be able to do like the reframings or engage with possible new sources of meaning. They can't do that when their animal's like not well. It's much easier to feel flexible in these ways and to feel experimental when your baseline needs are being met. So yeah, even if the gym doesn't like solve it, it may actually be a step along the way to the more philosophical.
Or let you come at that question from a better place.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so then we were going to talk about this on the prep call, but we were like, shit, we should just do this on the show. So you came out of philosophy. So by the way, I have officially, I'm communicating to the universe that I have officially made good on Philosophers on Twitch playing Flight Simulator. We have an actual philosopher on Twitch besides me, and I think I count, but like, whatever. Now the plural has been fulfilled. I think all of my guests are philosophical, and I had a whole spiel prepared about what is philosophy but love of wisdom, and in that way, many of my, all my guests are philosophers. But I just wanted to pin this moment in time, and then, but yeah, so you came out of academic philosophy. I guess I'm kind of curious to know about that.
Yeah. And it's funny because like when I switched my major to philosophy, this is a long time ago, like 15 years ago, my relationship with my mom at the time was not great to begin with, but I tell her, like, oh, I'm a philosophy major now. Of course, it's like a joke. And I had some blog, everyone had like a little baby WordPress back then, and it was like Pam philosophizes, right? And she was just like appalled that I would be out in the world like calling myself a philosopher, right? Which is like, this is the whole thing. It's sort of depending on your context, Some
Mhm.
people like think it's totally fine and legitimate. Other people think it's like incredibly highfalutin. And then academics have like sort of turf to protect, just like sort of in a pragmatic way. So it's funny that I would be the one who sort of counts as a real philosopher, because I'm sure to the academics I know, they think, you know, they see me being life coach for smart people or whatever. And I'm sure a few of them like think it's all, you know, like grift and like I couldn't hack it at the real thing or whatever. But yeah, so I started a PhD. I spent more than a few years working towards a PhD in philosophy, first at Arizona State, and then I transferred to Columbia, which is what brought me to New York about, that was 2010. So at the time I was always like interested in ethics mostly, and at the time I was specializing in the philosophy of education, and I was doing work on things like you know, like moral education, character education, whether the conventional ways of thinking of that like had any real philosophical basis, what the implications might be. For a while, this like situationist social psychology was really hot, sort of pre-replication crisis. I think a lot of that hasn't stood up, but there were big questions then about like, if people don't have stable characters, if it's very easy to get them to do bad things, then what would a character education in light of that look like? So I was studying stuff like that, and I got to Columbia, and I was really excited to be in New York, but you know, like, it doesn't matter how high you go up an academic food chain or any food chain, there's always people around who aren't as smart as you would hope they would be. There's always like rot in the institution. And I sort of like, I thought I was gonna, you know, put my nose to the grindstone and like do all this amazing work and like show everyone, and I just like couldn't muster any real motivation at all. So I dropped out. I dropped out with like pretty much like the coursework done. I never wrote a dissertation. Well, and I wanted to stay in New York, and I saw that people who were staying in New York were like working 5 adjunct jobs, you know, like driving to Staten Island or whatever in far New Jersey to like make ends meet, and that stinks. I had taught some philosophy courses at a community college in Arizona previously, and so that was sort of like been there, done that. And I actually if I could take back that teaching I did, I would. I taught critical thinking and bioethics, and when I think back to what those courses are like it makes me cringe.
What's wrong with critical thinking in bioethics?
Well, since you asked, I mean, so like critical in the context of like a dropout factory type community college, I think that although the content of a critical thinking class is fine, you know, they teach you about like logical fallacies and informal fallacies, and we talk about sort of like the media and how it like has misleading headlines or whatever. None of that stuff is false, but on the whole, I suspect that the effect of taking people in this community college who are just trying very hard and spending money out of their own pocket to get a leg up, like professionally, and get a job that is not precarious, I think the effect is to make them feel like, oh, there is this class of people that sort of like have decided what the right ways to think are. And they are making us pay for the privilege of hearing about that. And then we like take these tests with like modus ponens or whatever. Like, you know, 2 kids in the class like get it, they're awesome, they like could be philosophy majors if they were at a different school, like, and then everyone else, I think the effect is neutral to bad. And so and bioethics is probably even worse, because as people have been talking about, you know, since COVID, bioethics like as a field is like really a dumpster fire. And I taught it at a time in my life, I was like 22 or 23 years old when I was teaching bioethics. And this was at a community college where my students were mostly middle-aged women who were trying to become nurses, right? So these were like mothers who were trying to get like jobs in the medical field. And I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, it like makes me want to throw up, because I was just like this hot shot, like young philosophy grad student, and I was standing up in front of them like, oh, the principles of bioethics are like autonomy and beneficence and all this stuff. And so you just think about the principles and then you like do the right thing. And so they're raising their hand and they're like, don't these principles conflict? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, what else are you supposed to say? And these are people who I'm sure had like, sick children. They'd had babies who'd been in NICUs. They'd had parents who had gotten ill and died. And I had no experience whatsoever in these regards. And so it was just, like the final paper for the class is like a case study type of paper. And there were like choices in the back of the book of what you could write your case study on, where you apply these principles but come to no actual conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the case studies were things like, Mrs. Jones has kept kosher all her life, but now she has Alzheimer's and she's asking for ham at the nursing home. Should they give it to her? like you're supposed to say, well, autonomy. I mean, so no one even knows what autonomy, like, it's hard to know even what autonomy says about that, right? Because we're like, does that mean respecting the thing that when she was like all there, or do we just take what she says as
right?
And so, I read through 50 papers like that or whatever, where no one came to any conclusions, and I didn't have any conclusions either, and the whole thing was just like kind of a racket. I don't think that it helped any of those people to go on to be like sensitive medical professionals. I couldn't have helped them do that then. And they were paying a lot to, they're like paying a lot to take those kinds of courses. And they were like, it was like a night class. They were spending time away from their kids to do this with me. So if I could take that all back, I think I probably would.
It's interesting. I mean, yeah, dude. I mean, it's sort of, there's this question of like, what should the role of philosophy, so-called in so many different words, be in society? And yeah, where do those principles come from? Is that like someone wrote a paper and like someone wrote a textbook that referenced the top papers in the field, and then it trickles down to the course in the community college?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It was probably a cluster of papers, and that stuff gets it like gets warped as it gets taken up and put into use, because it could have made total sense that someone was like, oh, here's this giant, messy, amorphous thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd like to have some kind of conversation about how to think about these issues. And we need like places to grab onto it, right? So the places we'll grab on are like autonomy and beneficence and non-maleficence and whatever. Oh, justice. One of them is justice, right? Like no one knows. That's not like
right.
Okay, but so yeah, it would have been perfectly fine to be like, these are the handholds that we use to begin making sense of an issue of this kind. But then when it gets like parroted, and then you teach students to go through the motion of like, they have one paragraph on each principle where they actually come to no conclusion, like that whatever limitations the approach already had, that exacerbates them. It sort of like calcifies the lines of thought into like a very like into this path that isn't very fruitful, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do when you have guidelines like, let's touch on these aspects of things.
Right. Would it be too forward of me to, with almost no information about your life, posit a redemption arc of some kind in coming back to teach, to use philosophy for good in some kind of way?
Yeah, I didn't set out with that specific intention, but I think it's part of what I've gotten. I think that there is something very rich and fulfilling about working with people one-on-one in a way that can admit all these sorts of nuances behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
That like teaching in that way, or like doing academic work, could never have provided.
Right.
So that, yeah, that's a real, it's much better. This doesn't, I've had, in doing client work, I mean, it's hard to work with people, right? Like there's all sorts of frictions and there's potential for conflict and stuff. And so it's not like a piece of cake, but it feels much more worth it than like, oh, we're going to like underpay you to stand up in front of all these people who aren't getting anything out of it either. And like debase yourself intellectually.
Yeah. Totally. Really quickly, I'm noticing, I feel like there's a couple dropped frames happening. I'm just going to figure out how to do this. There's some way to do this. It kind of drops when we're shipping a lot of data. Let me think of a question to ask you that I can half listen to while I fix the technical side. I guess, I don't know, like it's a metaphor. Get out of here. No, let me actually think of a real question. Okay, so then that's what you were doing. And then I'm kind of curious, what's like the genesis moment? When did you decide to do coaching? Was it pretty random or was it like, did you think it through or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I quit grad school in 2011 and I gave myself what I guess you would call, people who are into like unschooling and stuff, they talk about like you need this sort of, what's the word? Like depressurization period, right? To just like get over the work and stuff that's been imposed on you. And so I stopped reading. I didn't read nonfiction. I just like drank a lot. I'm like still in New York. And I was working all these like random little jobs that weren't going anywhere. I was like babysitting. And then somewhere in there, I met my husband, Bern, who you guys have probably seen on Twitter. I met him on OkCupid in New York in 2013. And then I got my first real job, sort of, he got it for me. And I was the operations or like a business development team's manager, sort of like an admin position at a little startup. And I was like pretending to have a real job. And then we got married. And we moved to San Francisco and I had another startup job. We like really gave startup life a try and sort of like, I could see that I could do the work. Like I'm employable, I can like earn money, but when you have real jobs, they want you to like say all this stuff about how excited you are to be there and like these long-term paths with the company and stuff. And like, I'm not that motivated. So, yeah, right after we moved to San Francisco, I got pregnant with our first kid. And so we sort of never settled in and we came back to New York in time for her to be born in 2016. And I just, I stayed home for a while and I wasn't really working much. At the time I wrote here, you guys can look, if you look up Pamela Hobart, Bustle, that women's site, you will see my giant, endless backlog of the clickbait I used to write for Peanuts. At bustle.com, which is like a very popular women's site. So I was just like opportunistically taking a tiny bit of freelance writing that like wasn't really a big deal. And I had always sort of like had an entrepreneurial itch. I'd like tried to do tutoring when I was in grad school with limited success. And I started up this newsletter for moms that was supposed to be like smarter news. It's basically what Emily Oster now publishes on Substack. It was trying to be smart, but like I hated marketing it. Anyway, so I'm sort of like, I'm not working much, but I'm like trying to, like, what am I just going to be like a stay-at-home mom forever? I feel like I can and want to be doing something, but like, I don't know what. And then, so 3 years ago, my dad got sick and he got brain cancer just like out of the blue. And the whole thing was really terrible for me. And that's when I started working with my own philosophical counselor in New York. I would meet her in person. And I found her support really invaluable. It was sort of a kind that was like different from therapy. It's not therapy, but it's sort of like qualitatively different. Like she would challenge me on things, and even around like as touchy a subject as my father is actively dying, and I think I said something, for instance, about how terrible it was that like I said something like about how terrible it was that he was like taking a long time to die or something, and she was like, well, isn't it terrible when people die quickly too? And it's the type of thing that like was completely true and that was useful to me to hear, but that you can't say things like that when people come to you in this frame of like they're unwell, because it's too risky. Anyways, she was super helpful, and so
So you're saying she was willing to go there a little bit.
Yeah, willing to go there. Like in the context of like us having a good rapport and her being a really good listener and things, it was safe to do these things, and it's hard to find. Even like your good friends often won't push you on stuff like that.
That's totally true.
Yeah. So that's when I sort of began to realize that although she has way more experience than I have, it seemed like the type of thing that was not like so specialized or so algorithmic that like you needed to learn it in this like school kind of way. It was like more a set of like sensibilities and an orientation to people and how to use philosophy in real life that I thought I had. So I just sort of like, people who are used to like seeing me do 8 million different things. So they were not terribly surprised when I just like pop up on Facebook and I'm like, hey, like I'm going to be a life coach now. Like, and everyone sort of rolls their eyes, whatever, but like no one really cares when you do things like that.
Right.
And I had a survey that was basically trying to get at people who had been to therapy and liked something about it, but didn't like something else about it. Like what is like in this neighborhood that you haven't been able to find. And so a bunch of people like filled out my Google form, and I had calls with a couple of them like to hear more. And at this point, like they were helping me. This was sort of like market research. And one or two of those people, after we sort of talked about the market research type stuff, like they wanted to keep talking. And so I started charging them money, and I just went from there. So from day one, I've had this business model where I don't do calls with people for free, but I have like a lower price introductory call that you can like pay and get a questionnaire with like some intro questions. And some people use that to see if they want to work with me more.
Yeah.
And other people use it as like, I'm not really like looking for coaching, but I just like need a reality check on something, or I want to meet her. I have like one specific thing I want to talk about. And what's really like that is like, it's sort of nothing to me because I'm not like angry when someone if you did a lot of free calls, it just like takes up so much time and you don't know which of them are actually good leads.
Right.
And I don't have to have any thought of that whatsoever. I'm just like, okay, no sales calls, like let's just chat. We'll do what we can in this intro session. And then, you can tinker with stuff on your own or come back later or come back next week, whatever you want.
And that's a whole topic. I'm kind of interested in this stuff because I'm in a phase where I'm doing a whole lot of stuff online and I haven't figured out like, okay, now let me make a product. And I've experimented, I've done whatever, but there's a couple things I like about that. I like the recipe of what's something people like about this and what's something people they hate about it, and how can I give them what they like and without what they hate, that's cool. And I like the paid intro section, so you don't, they're sort of like not setting yourself up to hate what you do. Like,
yeah, that's right. It's really important, especially since I just like you hear people who like go to life coaching school and then they like quit their job and then they have all this time and they just spend it like on these free calls and like tinkering with their website and like SEOing their blog or whatever. And I sort of like, I launched my practice when I was like 7 months pregnant with my third child. So no, 9 months pregnant. It was like a month. It was like a month before he was born.
Right.
So
you're on the way to the hospital and you're like, I got this idea.
yeah, right. It's the only way I do things. So so it's sort of like I have something to offer people. some of them want it. The money is sort of, to me, more of like an organizing principle that's just like, I don't have much time. Who am I talking to? The people who can pay. I can't talk to everyone. It's just very obvious in like a boutique-y thing that like you can't help everyone. So yeah, it went from there. At first I was charging like $75 for that, for 45. It's like a 40 or 45 minute call the first time. I don't do an hour because if it's like, usually it's no problem filling the time, but here and there I've had someone who like, it's not a great fit, which no big deal. But an entire hour is a little bit painful in those cases. And I don't want to like hang up on people early, because then it's this weird thing where like you don't want to feel like you didn't get your money's worth, even if it's not great. Like the food was bad and the portions were so small.
I'm gonna eat it down.
And I just raised the price for that, which felt good. I raised my rates a couple of times, but I mean, a few people told me that they would not, that they hesitated a few times because they didn't want to pay before they like met me or something. But it sort of doesn't matter to me if a few people don't like that model, because I fill mostly the time that I want to work fine.
Well, all of these things are a little bit inefficient, and you just got to pick,
Yeah, it's true. And I think I have enough of an online presence that like no one thinks that I'm just like not real and I'm just taking the money or something. Like I'm hooked into most of these people's networks. I'm usually just like one acquaintance away.
Right.
So it's not a super big risk.
Oyster Smiling had a question, which is, how did you find the counselor?
Yeah. So philosophical counseling, I must have seen her. Maybe I saw her profiled in a magazine article or something. I knew that philosophical counseling was a thing, and there are two. I'm sure it was online, but there are two. I'm gonna forget the name of one of them right now, but APA is the American. Oh, I'm botching this. APA philosophy. So basically there are two very small professional organizations. One of them takes people, American Philosophical Practitioners Association, APA. So one of these organizations, APA, takes people who are trained in philosophy, like they have PhDs with like academic dissertations, and they give them like a crash weekend course in doing client work. So that's like taking philosophers and taking them a tiny bit towards being like therapists or counselors. And there's another organization whose name I forget, and they go the other way. So they take therapists and give them like a little bit of philosophy. So I knew about these things, and you can look her up. Her name is Lauren Tillinghast. Here, I'll write it in the chat. Lauren Tillinghast. So she's in New York, and I found her, I think it was like, I wanted to talk about like death. And I've been to therapy before. Like I have OCD, and I've done cognitive behavioral therapy and that sort of thing. But I just had the feeling that like if I went into a garden variety therapist wanting to talk about death, that they would not be able to entertain the type of conversation that I wanted to have.
Right.
They would be offering me like, I'm so sorry that your dad's like dying. This really came out of nowhere. Like, how can you like get more help right now? Like, how can you take care of yourself? What do you feel? How are you feeling this week? How are you feeling last week? And like, it's fine. Like, but it wasn't really like what I needed.
Well, that's I don't know. That's bullshit. I mean, that approach sucks. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. I mean, if someone's coming in for sometimes you do want to hear that, but that's a different thing. I don't know. Like something. Yeah. Like if I had maybe I expect weird things of my friends or something. But Yeah. Chaos says there's subway ads for this in NYC. Think for a minute. So what conversation did you want to have?
I mean, I basically I spent this whole year, I mean, and beyond, just
That's what
like
I'm talking about.
obsessed with death. And there was a point where I started reading 100 books about death. I'm like maybe 30 or 40 books in. I never finished because I got pregnant. But like I didn't want it to be treated as like, you are depressed, please proceed to the pharmacy. Like, it's fine. Like, it's fine if that's what someone needs. Like, I've taken the meds in the past, like when I was getting treatment for my OCD, but I felt like life had given me this opportunity to just wallow in like understanding what it means to be mortal. Like, everyone's adult life offers them at some point, maybe more than one time.
Yeah.
And I just, it was sort of strange because, so my dad got sick. He got in the car to go to the grocery store and like had a seizure on the way and went to the ER, and they did like an MRI, and he had gliioblastoma, which is like a really nasty brain tumor that they can't cure. And so he was terminal, but he lived for 10 more months. So it was like, there was no question that he was going to die and of this, but it was like prolonged. It was like a slow motion thing where I felt like he was dying from that day. But many of those times I saw him after that, he was actually like sort of okay. And it really messed with, I realized that I had these like categories mentally about like, okay, you're alive. Okay, you're like actively dying, and then you're dead. But he didn't fit this neatly. Like, it was 10 months, you know, his prognosis was poor, but I visited him like a dozen times in those 12 months. So yeah, we just sort of like wallowed around in all of this, and she helped me to, I came with a lot of beliefs about how special the situation was. You know, like, oh my God, I was sort of the first among the people I knew who had a parent who got sick in this way. And it was a pretty dramatic feeling, which is like literally you just get a text one day that's like, dad's in the hospital. Oh, he's got a brain tumor. Oh, it's this. Like, it's very whirlwind. But the sad realization that I sort of came to over a while was like, there's nothing special about this at all. Like, every family has stories of quick deaths, this sort of medium long death, extremely long deaths. Like, there aren't many ways it can go. In those terms, and like the way that medicine is now, this is like all that what's his face, Atul Gawande or whatever, like you know, they give you treatments that like don't really cure you, but they keep you alive a while, and it's all like very it reduces the share of people who get a quick if premature death, and it greatly increases the population of people who get a death more like my dad's. People seem to choose it.
The longer, slow-mo version.
Yeah. It's not really, I mean, a lot of people say like, oh, I wouldn't want those treatments or whatever. But then when you go in the brain cancer groups, it's not many people who like decline treatment and just sort of like have a couple good months and then go out. Instead, they're all showing up at radiation, you know, like frying themselves and like they offer you this chemo pill that like doesn't do anything except like, you know, make you like barf. And the brain cancer patients all take these huge doses of steroids because the brain surgery like makes everything inflamed, and you can't take huge amounts of steroids for like months on end without like your muscles all waste away and your face puffs up. It's like not good. So yeah, it was just like a really dramatic experience, and I didn't have a good place to take it. And my philosophical counselor, like, she would help me. There were times when I had to make choices, you know, like about how often to visit, for instance, or about like whether my dad didn't want to do a lot of stuff, but it was clear that if he wanted to do anything, like go somewhere, that it would have to be like right away because he's only going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And there were ethical questions about like, so do we push him and like try to make these memories or have like last hurrah, or like is it kind of fine that he's not really up for stuff because he had surgery and he's dying?
Right.
So she helped. Yeah, it was not like a supremely coachable thing. There were like choices that could be discussed. But yeah, I speak with her from time to time. You know, like when stuff comes up, and it's a really valuable relationship. And now I can't help but wonder like what will happen like when she dies. Like that's another loss. Like I'll have to face at some point. She's like maybe 15 years older than me.
Yeah. Let me think about what question I want to. What do you think it is that makes you want to go? So, I guess it's life brings you to a dark place, right? Of its own accord, you know. Even so, people respond to this super differently, right? And I feel like I'm sort of sensing like you're talking about reading books about death and stuff like that. So, what is that approach? Like, is it like you kind of have an instinct to generalize it, like in terms of a question of significance, or do you think everybody has that instinct when shit goes bad to like think about it in the widest terms? Or do you think like this is more of like a personal characteristic? Because so like I don't know, like to give an example from my own life. Let's see, what's the right example to give? I don't know. I had a couple weird experiences when I was younger, and totally seriously, I think people who believe in like have a highly spiritual world model would say that I had been, and I'm not saying this is my view, but like that I had been visited by weird spirits or demons or something as a kid. That's how they would describe it. How a more, modern person would describe it is I would like kind of trip out at weird things. Like something would happen, it would be like a little bit symbolic. It wasn't necessarily super clear what it was, and like it wasn't like some horrible traumatic thing happened to me, right? It was like one time I saw a video of a live squid being cut up, right? And it like hit me, like stuck with me, right? It was like there was like an opening in my armor, and it just super fucked with me for a bit. And I was like, why did that happen? What does it mean? Why? I don't even know if I had the language to like really be very explicit about it. But when I got back to it like years later, like what really was that about? It was on some kind of general theme, a very generalized like, what does it mean that there are beings that have no choice about their circumstance, that just go through total suffering, at the whim of some guy who wants to eat live squid, right? I don't know if any of that kind of gives you something to riff off of, but that's what I got.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I mean, I wouldn't have considered dealing with it in any other way. I mean, I guess some people try to like distract themselves, or engage in like certain forms of escapism, or they try to, sort of stay on the surface of the thing, in a way, or they busy themselves with like the practical issues around it. I mean, in a way, the situation was just structured to indulge me in this because I was living in New York and my dad was in Atlanta, where I grew up. So I was going through these periods where I was visiting like every 3 weeks. So I would go and I would, spend a couple nights there and just be like really immersed in like the reality of the situation, like at the hospital, at the assisted living, like seeing what he looked like, sort of having to put on a happy face to some extent, which is a whole nother story. I mean, he was sort of, denial is like a little bit too simple of a term, but like he didn't really want to like talk about that he was dying, and didn't believe it at times. So, and now I'm sort of like, when I'm dying, my children are going to come visit, and like that's all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, how my life's gone, the things I did right, the things I did wrong, like how their lives are. Like, we are going to be talking about death every day until it's done. I don't want them. I mean, of course, they will find that miserable in their own ways, but I found not talking about it miserable to me. But it was sort of like his show. So, I would visit, and I'd be sort of like immersed in the actual situation, and then I'd like go back to my regular life in New York. But that was very strange because it's like I could be physically removed from what was happening, but I couldn't really ever stop thinking about it. Like, I have like a very ruminative personality. So I couldn't stop thinking about it, even though I was separated and I needed like things to do in those times. So I wanted something better to do than like just think like the same thoughts, like in a loop. And I mean, like, I was drinking a lot that summer. I drank a ton, but even like that drinking that I did, it didn't like take me away from what was happening. I would like drink and like think about death more.
Get into it, yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely had those periods. I'm usually the happiest drunk around, but then like there'll be a month every now and then, like when stuff is different, where I'm just like, I go right into a dark place, never really angry, more just like
yeah, it can happen.
Yeah. Damn, this is some heavy shit. I've got, I'm ready for it. I think I'm ready. I'm cool with talking about it. It's like, yeah, and there's a lot of stuff about death, I guess, that we can talk about. Yeah, we can kind of take this. Oh, yeah, thank you, Soren. I guess I fixed my audio a little better. Yeah, I guess we can kind of take this wherever you want to. Like, I think I'm curious to hear generally. Well, we had a couple questions on Twitter. There's some questions about like, what is it like doing what you do, and what is your, there's some I can find the actual question as it was stated. It was sort of about like the business itself, things like odd philosophical views you might have, or controversial ones. I won't out you with the one that you mentioned to me, but you can out yourself if you want. And then there's a couple what Multi said. Did other people have strong reactions to you wanting to think about this a lot? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, without getting into the peculiarities of the family dynamics too much, like, everyone in my immediate family was dealing with it like completely differently. And my mom and dad had also been divorced for like 10 years at that time, but my mom was my dad's primary caregiver, which like everything just gets so complicated when there's a crisis like this, and it's like endlessly complicated.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that I was the most extreme one in this way. My mom really just wanted to like keep my dad happy and like do what he said he wanted, and like she would busy herself with like all the little day-to-day stuff. Mm-hmm. But like I couldn't have had that role even if I had wanted it, because of like being at a distance. So we were all sort of like slotted into the right thing logistically as well, which is probably no coincidence.
Right.
I think it was really hard around this time because I had, so my older daughter was 2, and my dad got sick when my middle child was 5 months old. So they were little, and we had just sort of like started settling in with like 2 kids, which was a big change over 1. And I was just sort of like puttering around gentrified Brooklyn, like going to kid things and like going to the grocery store and stuff. And I just felt like no one who encountered me like at the kid place or whatever had any idea like what I was going through. Right. And that feeling doesn't usually bother me. Like, I don't usually feel like profoundly unknown, but I was thinking about it so much. It was just terrible. Like, maybe a week after my dad got sick, I was at the kid play place, and some mom who I had met one time like months before, she saw me, and I was trying to avoid her, but like she saw me and she recognized me, and she came running over and she's like, "Oh, hey, how are you?" Fine. And I was like, "How are you?" And she said she had some inane thing, like she had taken her kid in a cab to a doctor's appointment that was misscheduled, and so they couldn't see the doctor, and then she had to like take the kid in the cab all the way back home with no appointment. Like, it's the kind of thing that like on some level is like huge hassle, incredible hassle. Any mom could tell you that would like ruin your whole day and be really stressful and like waste money. But at that time, like, I just could not hear this.
Right.
I was just like my eyes are bulging out of my head over how trivial your thing is compared to my thing that you don't actually even know about. And those moments were just like really upsetting. So I started blurting out to everyone that my dad was dying, which I'm actually like fairly introverted, but I'd find myself like just saying it to, like people I had just met or like cashiers. It just like it was just so much energy. It like had to come out, even though it was like sad energy. I like just had to do something.
Right.
And people are mostly nice even when you do that to them. Or like, "Oh, I'm real sorry," or like, "Oh, I lost my dad too," or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's the very last time I went to see him, it was like a day before he died, and he was no longer conscious. But I went to visit, and I was like 7 months pregnant, and I went back to the airport, and I was giving like the baggage lady, I was checking my bag, and I looked like I'd seen ghosts, because like I more or less had, and she was like, "Oh, are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I just saw my dad for the last time." Like she's just like the Delta lady or whatever, kind of grandmotherly type. And what she said to me, she was like, "Oh, try not to be too sad for the baby." Because like I'm pregnant, like try not to be too sad, because like your sad hormones are like bathing your unborn child.
Thanks,
and like
lady.
it or something. And I remember thinking, like, I'm just like I've been bathing him. He has like these sad hormones are like all this child has ever known, and like he is mine. I will do this to him. I will keep doing this to him. So yeah, certainly people are very different in this way. Like some people are really private. We lost another family member recently, and Byrne like doesn't talk about it at all. So
right.
It's super individual.
Not to have a weird transition, but I do think we are probably above where the boat got stuck-ish.
Oh.
Someone earlier said, unless I'm totally wrong. No, this is, if this map is any indicator. Someone said it was in the southern part. So we went from the top at HEPS down the thing, and now we're in the southern part. I feel like a humongous boat could get stuck here. As empirically it was. So it's kind of cool. Do you think people are like morbid's the wrong word? Oh yeah, well here I'll Vogelfrey mentioned this calendar I used to own, which it feels kind of thematic. I'll throw it up on the screen.
Okay.
This is it says Life Calendar, and it's blurry, unfortunately. Each of these is a week. So there are, like 52 across, and then it's 90 years. So they're generous. They give you 90 years. And the idea is, so this is from this Wait But Why. Mm-hmm. This one's a little bit
better. I know it.
You know this thing. Mm-hmm. And right, it's got boom. And so it's like it's like here, you're 20 years old. Like, all right. I'm 31, so I'm here, right? And you can kind of knock them off week by week. I would occasionally, I'd have like a birthday party and be like, check off the last box. Yeah, I owned it for a while. I had it hanging in my room as a kind of like memento mori thing, but I think it kind of made me feel bad. I mean, that's the honest. It was sort of like I like the idea of like kind of being like a super badass. You know, it's kind of like the modern like having a skull on your desk type of thing. But I don't know. For a while, I feel like it did something good. Like you kind of take some time sitting with your freaking calendar, and then I felt like it did what I wanted it to, and I was like didn't feel that great having it around all the time. I don't know. It's sort of I don't know what I was hoping for. Like maybe I would fully, completely adapt to my mortality just by having this fucking poster around. It's like, but you know.
Oh my gosh, I'm so delighted that you brought this up. This is a really good coincidence, because I remember that 𝕬𝕚𝕚𝕚, but I'd forgotten what it was.
Uh-huh.
And I thought of it just yesterday because one of the posts that I am about to write, I'm doing this like ship 30 posts in 30 days thing with this guy on Twitter. It's like just a little challenge. We have like Slack buddies, whatever. But so I'm trying to pump out this backlog of ideas that I've had in short form posts. And the one that I was going to write today, and then maybe I'll write tomorrow, I think it's going to be called scarcity as info hazard or something like that. And the idea is that there are lots of ways to, you know, people talk about scarcity and abundance, blah, blah, blah. And there are all these different ways of sort of inducing a scarcity mindset that people do because they claim it has good effects. So like this sort of memento mori is one. Another common one is where they say, oh, if you spent X minutes on social media every day for such and such years, then that's like X years of your life, you know. Or if you bought a coffee every day, you could have retired 2 years earlier, you know, stuff like that.
Right.
They mean well. They mean well because their mental model, they're projecting that like, oh, when I think in this way, it makes me wiser. But my experience personally and what I know of other people is that this is not universal.
Right.
That induced scarcity framings, even when they're sort of like true in some sense, like you're only going to see your parents X more times if you see them twice a year or whatever, they make a lot of people much more panicked than wise.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth treating as a given, right? Like, even if it makes you panicked because you're flawed in some way, like, if you can't expect to make better choices for that, then don't use it. You know, there are other ways to think about what you value and where you're putting your time and your money and stuff than the induced scarcity that's info hazardy, on my view.
It's like it tries to like have a very simple litmus test that like tells you you're doing things badly or you're gonna have horrible outcomes, basically.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I realized, like, so when my dad got sick, it really was like, you're going to visit him like 5 to 20 more times. Like, it was very obvious. It didn't take like a 𝕬𝕚𝕚𝕚 to show me that. It was just obvious. And the quality, not by like how good or bad they were, but like the qualitative feel of visiting him during that time was just excruciating because from the induced scarcity or from the just actual scarcity perspective, it felt like the remaining visits should be like really important, or like we had to do the most important things, or like say the most important things or whatever. This is something I worked through with my philosophical counselor. But like, he was sick. Like I'd fly there and we'd just like watch daytime television, and like I'd bring him a latte or like a donut or something. And I really had to make my peace with that, not as like a compromise, but that it was actually like appropriate. Like those were normal visits. I was actually able to have like sort of normal visits with him instead of this like dramatized like TV idea of what your last visits might be like. But it was hard. And I think that depending on the person and the situation, when you like raise the stakes in this way, that you may be inviting that sort of like overdone, overthought, really fraught, like, oh, how you never get your time back, so like how do I spend it? Like it makes a lot of people really neurotic.
Totally.
Way more neurotic than they already were. They don't need that. I spend much more time helping people, that my type of client, they need help coming away from that stuff. They don't need help going onto it.
Totally. Yeah, it's sort of like a couple thing, just the right tiny dose of that at the right time that's really specifically designed for you, maybe. But broadcasting it everywhere, I think I'm inclined to agree. And so what are you looking forward to, I guess? Like, where do you want to go with the business?
Yeah, so I've been working very part-time until now, like maybe 10 to 15 hours a week tops, in the past 2 years. And that's been great, but I'm sort of my son, the little one, is almost 2, and here in Austin, we lucked into like a really amazing hippie preschool that's just like, it doesn't have a curriculum, it's just like a yard, like a free range type of situation, and all my kids are there now. And so he just went up to like full time, which means he like takes his nap there and I can leave him into the afternoon. So I'm sort of trying to scale up and fill a little bit more this time. I don't know if it's like fully full-time work. Also, people have warped ideas about like what full-time work is. Like to some people full-time is like 25 hours, and to other people full-time is like 80 hours, and I definitely don't want to work all the time. But
right.
So I'm just trying to scale up a little bit, basically, is what I'm saying. I have 2 annual reviews up on my blog. If you guys were interested in any of the details of that, I
did see one of those, by the way, and I appreciated, just from a business perspective, how much detail you went to. Because for anyone who hasn't seen it, the one I read, Pamela just goes into like, here are the number of hours and the per hour and how many, what did you say, like dropped off clients and new client, the turnover and stuff. It's just cool to get numbers. Like,
yeah, I think it's important because especially life coaching is sort of a smoke and mirrors kind of business. Like you see people like they're in Bali on Instagram or whatever, and you're like, okay, either this person is like somehow getting all these people to like spend $1 million with them to like try to become them or something, or they're just faking. Like it's very hard to know what's behind there. And so one thing that people have told me about what they know about my business is that it's sort of an example of like, I'm not making $1 billion, but I'm making a non-negligible amount of money in a small amount of time doing exactly what I want to do. And that it is achievable in sort of this scale is like quite realistic. So yeah, I just, at this point, it's sort of like, I know that it's not just like random quick wins. I just kind of have to keep going. I get most of my clients from Twitter, which probably won't surprise you. So I sort of, to get more clients at this point, all I really have to do is I'm doing these like 30 posts in 30 days. I didn't email for a while because we had this crazy storm in Texas, and then like my kids couldn't go to preschool for a while because of COVID, which is why I had to keep putting you off my goal for this show. But that's over. So like all I have to do, I don't know exactly how many clients will get me, but I just have to like do some blogs, start sending emails to my list again. I don't have an enormous list. It's like 700 people. And they'll trickle in.
Right. For sure. And so you've been on Twitter a long time though. You said 12 years.
Yeah, maybe.
Or 12,
so. 12 years. Yeah. I joined, I think it was the spring of 2009.
Yeah, I like joined when around then, followed all my friends and got followed by all my friends, and then didn't touch it till a year and a half ago. And that's the whole thing. We had Visa on. We talked a little bit. We've Chaos Prime also, and Eigen were able to recount a little bit of like Twitter history. This has just been a thing that it's kind of interesting because it's like, I get super into it. I'm like, this is awesome. There's all this stuff happening. And then you start to be like, damn, like, what's the macro pattern? Like, what are the eras and stuff? Yeah, it's interesting. And so, you mentioned the hippie school. Do you have like any wacky parenting philosophy that has a name or anything like that?
I mean,
Not that that's like, not that I know anything about this. I just said, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's cool.
I just talked to Divya about it a bit.
Right. Yeah, we're sort of leaning in a unschooling kind of direction, but my kids are so little and they're so close together in age that like I'm just like simply unable to care for them by myself. I had almost no childcare help until my third was born, and then the three of them just like having three of them, they were 3, 1, and newborn. Like it just destroyed me. And this was right after my dad died. So like I was like running on emotionally empty, and we were in this tiny New York apartment. It was terrible. So they're at this preschool more or less just to like get them out of the house for a while. And when they're so little, like we're chill about stuff. Like we don't have like fancy stuff in the house or anything like that. But they literally just run around like opening the scissors drawer and like throwing glasses. Like it's funny, but that's not hyperbolic. That's like literally what they do all day long.
Right.
You turn and like bodies are hitting the floor, and like they dance on the table. This is one of my mistakes, is like I thought that if we were ultra strict about just a few things, like safety issues, and really consistent, that we would be able to make those stick even from like a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make life low stress. This is like the Brian Kaplan, have more kids, it doesn't have to be so hard type of view. And it's just not true. Like even if you don't sweat small stuff, even if you're not worried about their education, their future, nutrition, sleep, or anything, just getting through the day is so hard. So that's just a way of saying I like being able to send them to this free range preschool because they get to just do whatever they want all day there. They're not getting yelled at. They're not like breaking things. They're just like in the dirt, running amok. They see each other. They see other kids. It's really sort of ideal COVID wise because it's mostly outdoors.
Right.
And the thing is that most people at a place like this, they see themselves as giving their children like a few years off from the rat race, like before it begins. And then they will move into private schools or like better public schools and like begin, off to the races.
Right. That weird thing we do.
Right. Whereas for us, like this may be the only school they ever go to. Like this may be like just sort of childcare for a while, and then when they're able to just like tinker around the house while I do other things, they may not go.
Totally. And it's like different ages. It's like mixed age group kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit mixed. They have a few different areas of the play yard, but I think the kids there go up to like maybe 6 or 7. So that's for the really brave parents who are like willing to let their kids like miss kindergarten phonics or whatever. It starts at the age of 18 months because like that's when you're big enough to like play outside and not just have to be held all day. So cool.
People in the chat are talking about open fields. They're making cow jokes. Got city-sized bouncy castle recommendation. Sand and dirt. You ever see that documentary? I think it's called Babies.
Someone told me about it, and I never looked it up. They said it was good.
They've got 4 babies. There's a San Francisco baby, Japan, somewhere in Africa, and somewhere in Mongolia. And they show the African baby, like just like picking up like a bone that a dog was just chewing on and just like sucking on it, and it's just really different. There's like a kind of like stray looking dog. Maybe it's not like a stray dog. Maybe it's like their dog, but they're like just, I don't know. The whole vibe is different. Then you have the San Francisco, the Japanese baby is always strapped onto something, just kind of getting wheeled around life in this like crazy psychedelic world. It is good. It's good because if I recall correctly, I think there's no talking. Maybe somebody here has seen it. It's just these babies. They just go between the babies. Felt like data to me. I was interested in that. Just about like different ways of doing it. I apparently used to eat a lot of dirt. I would eat dirt. We had a garden. I would pluck vegetables out of the ground and eat them when they were like too early to be eaten. And I have always credited this with my generally being a pretty healthy person. I don't really get sick. So I don't know if it's bullshit, but I believe it.
Yeah, I'm just like, my kids are always filthy. We don't really bathe them that much. It's like too much of a hassle.
Yeah.
They eat the sand. You know, like this here in Austin, we're like renting this single family house, and they have like a yard, and same yard that my dog is in, and the neighbors' outdoor cats are always out here. Like, they're so filthy. There's no point even trying. People always, every now and then on Twitter, people talk about like, oh my God, people wear shoes in their house or whatever. I mean, I just, in New York, like, you're in a small place and you're trying to get the kids ready to go out or whatever. So it's very hard to maintain like, this is the inner space where shoes don't go and this is the outer space. Cause like, you know, you put their shoes on them and then they run in and you're running after them and now it's dirty. So we've sort of always had shoes in the house, and the floor is impossible to keep clean. It's like one of my biggest struggles. I never used to clean the floor. Like when I lived alone, I would vacuum like once a month. I had two short-haired dogs. I would vacuum like once a month and like spot clean if I spilled something, and that was it. And now I mop the floor with like a thing like every day, and it's still never clean. Like, these things will really make you crazy. I couldn't appreciate it until I'd been doing it for like 3, 4, 5 years.
Right.
It's not to have high standards. We have very low standards for cleanliness and organization and stuff. It's just to be like a little bit better than like they're going to come take your kids away.
Right.
That's what I didn't understand. I thought that if you lowered your standards and chilled out, that parenting could be easy. And it's just like still not. Yeah.
We had a question in chat about the Sudbury School. Sudbury School idea is that kids don't bully each other if you have a wide range of ages because the young ones model the older and the older takes on a sort of guide or a mature role. Do you think that's true? I guess if there's any kind of interactions between older and younger kids thing.
Yeah, I've heard about these Sudbury schools. I'm sort of interested in them. I don't know. I haven't looked them up in Austin yet, but it's sort of like, I think it depends a lot because like my oldest child is 5, and if I had only her, it would be a breeze. Like, you can talk to her, you can like tell her what you're doing. She'll like follow a lot of instructions and she can do things to care for herself.
Mm-hmm.
But my babies, they like drag her down to their level. Like, the group dynamics are such that it often feels like I have 3 1-year-olds.
Right.
But I think it's probably different in a larger group. And it may be different also when the parents don't, if you can avoid micromanaging, it's really hard not to micromanage little kids' interactions because they like take toys from each other and they don't really understand sharing, and you can sort of make them do it, but they don't get it. And they are always like hitting each other and stuff. And it's very hard to know how to be judicious about that. But I can see that they would maybe reach some kind of equilibrium in the right environment where it's basically fine.
Yeah. Someone mentioned they were terrified of 5th graders. I'm remembering how they took Pokemon cards away at my school because the older kids were like ripping off the younger kids. 5th is like 5th graders and kindergartners. But that is a little bit older. Chaos Prime says, I definitely agree with the whole thesis that the modern schooling idea that classes need to be horizontal with no vertical integration is an atrocity. Yeah, I was in one of these, like, they had a very brief buddy thing with kindergartners and fifth graders when I was a kindergartner. And I still remember having the fifth grade buddy and this being, like, awesome. I remember this being, like, very cool that this was happening. Or I guess the age gap was large enough that they're not going to bully, like, kindergartners. At least this particular public school culture or whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely an atrocity to do this to kids. And I'm thinking back, just goes to show how rigid the model is. That so I started kindergarten at the regular age. I have a December birthday, so I'm like middle of the pack. And then I started kindergarten and I went to first grade, and I was like having behavioral problems because I thought it was boring. And, if I had been a boy, they would have like given me Adderall, but I was a girl and my mom is pushy. So she like took me to a kiddie shrink and I had an IQ test and all this stuff. And the end result is that I got skipped. I got skipped to the second grade. I didn't do first grade.
Right.
And this like less than 1 year age difference, like it followed me like the whole rest of my educational years. It was like always a big deal. But that's so fake. It's like so fake that what in most cases is like a 9-month age difference would be enough to give me this like role to fill of being the precocious younger one. It might have been better than the alternative of like being bored and hating school early, but I also still hated school in the end, as do many people. So I don't know.
My dad had that. He was skipped a grade and he said it was a terrible idea. He said it was bullshit. It's the conclusion he came away with. Just because, I mean, I don't know, what is it that kids form their own weird status hierarchies around things and they treat you differently.
Yeah, there's not, like, school is just such a poisonous institution in itself that, like, there were these bureaucratic power struggles when I skipped, in that they skipped me into a teacher's class who didn't want me there. Like, she didn't agree with me being skipped. So at the age of 6, I'm trying to negotiate, like, doing work for and with a teacher who is visibly resentful of my presence.
Right.
And then all these kids who sort of think I'm really special and also sort of think I'm, like, have it in for me. Like, that is an awful lot for like a 6-year-old. This is some Ender's Game dealing with.
This is some Ender. That's what that book was about.
Yeah, not good. I hope that what I hope for my kids is, I hope that this preschool is like enough for them to do and keep them a little bit busy until they can like get some interest. And I sort of figured that we would not have to do much like by way of formal school or even homeschooling, as long as they like had something they could go to and see other kids, whether it's like a sport or like something more intellectual, or like maybe I'll have a chess kid. I don't know. I'm open to what it might be. And then we could sort of, instead of doing that thing insanely on top of everything else, that would be like their activity. And then the rest of the time we just sort of like go about our business, and hopefully that would be fine. And then at some point their social life will become, more of their responsibility.
Right. Yeah, I have these thoughts on like, how would I have turned out if I had done this type of school or that type of school, but who the hell knows? I feel like alcohol's been coming up, but maybe I've just been thinking about it. So I'm gonna pour myself a drink real quick. I don't know if you have anything nearby.
Yeah, okay.
If you
this is my daughter's lunch bag full of hard seltzer.
Nice. All right. Give me a minute. All right, there we go. I am having some whiskey. Oh, the plane is seeming to stay up. I'm liking this landscape, by the way. It's pretty crazy. Better pour this before the plane goes down. Yesterday, I'm not a big drinker these days, but yesterday, yesterday I had a big beer, like a big bottle, and it was 560 calories, I believe, or 570 or so, and I was hungry at the end of the day, but I was kind of pleased. I was like, oh, it's just there's a certain number of calories. I could just have it and have some protein shakes and like still lose weight, right, in expectation.
Yeah.
But I was hungry. I did go to bed. I was just kind of like crap, and then ended up eating some more stuff. Well, cheers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if any of you guys caught this, because I made some tweet about it last week, but I did just start taking Adderall, and I'm like never hungry anymore.
Oh,
Not an experience I've ever had in my entire life. Yeah, I tweeted something that was like, were all these people who said they forgot about lunch just taking Adderall?
This is one of the things I wonder about is, what's the Adderall taking dark matter of the universe? Who's on Adderall that you wouldn't think, and how many people? That's the thing I want to know. I've heard, so I'm not going to make this traceable anyway. I know of a story of some people who ended up seeing, I do know these people though, so it's a real story. It's like somehow they got forwarded the list of all the kids at the school who were on medication and what the medications were. Like a really bad thing to accidentally leak. It was like a fucked up email or something. And
yeah,
I mean, they try, the way I heard it is they try to not look, but like you see a little bit and it's like everybody, a whole lot of people are taking stuff. Not that it's bad or whatever, but it's sort of this weird amount of sort of, talked about but not talked about. That's the thing I wonder about, just the dark matter side.
Yeah. I sort of like didn't even realize like what it was supposed to be doing or anything until kind of recently. It was just sort of like a punchline, like, oh, those boys who can't stay in their seat, they like give them speed. Oh, okay.
Right.
Like I didn't think about it again. I didn't think about like how as an adult even lots of the people who I know and might be like working around. And then I had this job and my boss was like a weird dude and he had many peculiarities. And then after the fact, like years after the fact, I was talking with a coworker from that job and he was like, oh yeah, so-and-so was always like all hopped up on Dexedrine or whatever. And it sort of like blew my mind, it was the dark matter, it was like the unseen layer of reality that like I wasn't even attuned to as an adult.
Yeah.
But now I guess I am.
I mean, yeah. How is it? Or is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sort of ambivalent about the whole thing. Like I received an ADHD diagnosis last summer, and I sort of like started trying meds, and I like didn't. I sort of like just set it all aside, and then when I moved, that like telehealth was not available in Texas, so I just picked it up again here because a friend of mine had used this same telehealth guy because like everyone I know has ADHD and prescriptions. And so I just sort of figured, I might as well like experiment with this in earnest now and see what's up.
Yeah.
I think that it's a lower dose than most people land on ultimately. And I don't, it's not transformative. It doesn't feel like being like a totally different person, but it definitely does something. And I just sort of, I still have big questions about like, all of these mental health things, which I take very seriously, my OCD and this and other people's stuff, like they're names for clusters of symptoms. But we still don't know terribly much about what has actually gone wrong. Where did it come from? How much of an outlier are you? Is ADHD just that an increasingly large amount of people can't cope with the demands of like a fairly thoroughly novel environment? seems plausible. But like, even if that's the case, you still as an individual have to decide, okay, so I'm dealing with this environment that's like sort of not right for me.
Right.
Or a lot of people, like, I still have choices,
Right.
you know, and one of them is take the Adderall. One of them is like try to change your environment more. One of them is like to buck up. Really, people do all of these at the same time.
Right.
But it's still like mysterious, you know, like people will say things like, oh, I got my ADHD diagnosis and then it all made sense.
I have theories here. The category seems to be really, to have a category, like have a term, often, I was talking about this with some Twitter people actually, who were saying that just having a term for this shit that had been going down their whole lives was itself kind of like a healing, clarifying moment. No, why is that good? You know, why does that work that way? I don't know.
Right. I think, yeah, so there's a lot of things that are happening at once when people come across like a mental health concept or a diagnosis or a label of this kind. And it's sort of like bundled together. And some of the things are good and some of them are bad. So the bad is this sort of like reflexive medicalization or whatever. The good is like, it's a thing that we know of, right? It's not unique to you. You're not alone. There are people out there who have been experimenting with what to do about this. They have options for you, right? Like that's the really, that's the sort of heartening part. But the label as in a shorthand for clusters of symptoms is not itself, it does not itself offer like explanatory power. It's just like a label. It sort of stands in for that people have been talking about this and working on it, and there's like other things.
Right.
So like, okay, so I have 3 kids. I find myself not being able to manage their clothing. I like can't manage my whole family's, you know, there's all this paperwork, like all these bureaucracies to deal with. Like I'm in charge of everyone's health insurance. I'm in charge of like all the groceries. It's just like 800,000 things. People with any level of executive function struggle with this. It's hard. So some people look at that and they're like, what you have is like a, you know, like a gendered problem. You need to give some more of those tasks with your husband or whatever. It's not you. You're not like sick. Then other people might be like, you just don't, you know, you haven't learned, right? Like there are ways to manage these things better. Like here's a system, here's software, whatever.
Right.
Like that's the sort of, you know, troubleshooting approach. And then someone else comes and says, it's not your fault. You were never going to have huge success at this because it's the exact type of thing that you can't do well because you have ADHD.
Right.
And it's like, since we don't actually know what ADHD is or what causes it, that is not explanatory beyond saying, like, partly in my ear, all that says is, of course you can't get more organized because you're not organized.
Yeah.
It's sort of like it's something I already knew. I already knew that I did not excel in these ways, and that's not news.
This is the example. Eliezer Yudkowsky uses this example in one of his blog posts, like talking about some, you know, ancient philosopher reasoning about substances that put you to sleep and concluding that they had a soporific tendency.
Right. Like
maybe that's from a play, but yeah.
Yeah.
That might be Oscar Wilde. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on like the spirit and the purpose of making an observation like that. If the purpose is to like open an inquiry with a microscope about like what are the particles in there and how do they like make you release melatonin or whatever, then that's fine. Like, okay, we have a class of things now called soporifics. Like, let's see what they have and what they share. Let's see what ways they're different or whatever. But by itself, it's just not much.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience with all this when I was in grade school. I got the ADHD, one of them, diagnosis, and the test they gave me, I to this day don't know whether this test was bullshit or not. So the test is, they had a square on the screen or something like that, and you had to like click it when it appeared, right? So, it was like a timing thing. And I think the idea was maybe if you're very distractible, you won't click the thing. Around this guy's computer are comics, okay? Like cut out comics strips from the newspaper all around the monitor. And I'm supposed to be looking at the square. And to this day, I don't know, is that the test? Or was this guy gaming the test to get more people as, therapy, psychiatry clients? I don't know. But they diagnosed me, and I took all this stuff. I took all kinds of different crazy pills and whatever. For 5 years, maybe longer. And then, that said, in some ways I did have a good experience with it, which I guess is a longer story. But at a certain point, I did basically, I like personally concluded that I didn't like who I was in a way. Like it was some way, it felt like it was altering my personality. And I just stopped taking the stuff. After a while, I told my parents, and I did start doing a little bit worse in school. Like, I think I probably at least half a letter grade or something like that. But I felt I liked myself more. So, one of a billion stories out there, I guess, the education system and the medication system colliding.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the diagnostic criteria that even if your ADHD doesn't come to a head until you're an adult, that they sort of ask you questions to see if they can uncover stuff about your childhood, because it's supposed to be something that's pretty much present all through your life and not transient.
Right.
And I knew that they'd be asking questions like that. So, I mean, I didn't lie, but it's not hard to think of times where oh, I left my textbook at school.
Right.
Can you write the prescription now,
Right.
Some of that stuff is just so obviously normal that it's an embarrassment that they would latch onto it as any kind of interesting feature of your life. But, sort of bigger things maybe make some sense. Not that the ADHD label is explanatory, but just that once you realize you have this tendency, it can sort of explain other things, which is girls do not tend to be as disruptive. They just sort of tend to be quietly checked out. And I was one of these people who just coasted in school until it actually required a lot of work, and then I had absolutely no idea what to do and just gave up. And I think that if I had maybe stronger powers of attention when I hit this point where I had to study, maybe that's when you're oh, I'm going to take my book out and I'm going to read for more than 5 minutes, and I'm going to divide this lesson into chunks and, get them one by one or whatever. But if you don't, and then that part of that is, it's not rocket science, but it's learned, and then it becomes a habit. And if you sort of don't get that thing off the ground, then you remain clueless. And it's not all attributable to ADHD, but it's sort of you just got off the best path more easily than you might otherwise have, and then that is a vicious cycle.
Yeah. I just thought to dig up some of the questions you got.
Yeah, sure.
We had a question from 𝔽𝕝𝕚𝕚𝕦. What are the top 3 ideas or beliefs you hope your children go into the world with and would serve them best?
Yeah, I saw this one. I sort of I gave it some thought, and I didn't come up with much.
Question.
It's really hard. I think that there are a lot of sound bite type answers available. I want them to know that to believe in themselves, and if they put their mind to it, they'll pull through, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't think that. I just have very nuanced views on pretty much everything. And I think something that I would want them to know, I don't have good words for this yet, but if I had to characterize like my approach to life, I somehow feel like things are both incredibly serious. Like I feel like a serious person. I am a serious person. But I somehow have managed to like take specific things just very lightly. Like, okay, you thought you were like going to be an academic, but now you like feel like going to grad school. Like, okay, what's next? I was married earlier in my life and I got divorced really quickly, and it's sort of like, oh, okay, whoops, what's next? That story is actually even more sordid in that I left my ex-husband for a married man, and then he dumped me. So I mean, this is like sitcom grade like drama, right? And it happened to me, and it was mortifying. But like, I just sort of like picked up and moved on. I've never been too worried about money. It's sort of like money feels really fake to me. It's just kind of like it shows up and then it goes out. I mean, I'm privileged to be able to deal with it like that, but I do.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how to teach my kids this. You know, like I hope that they can just kind of learn by like knowing me as they grow.
You're right.
That so many of these things, and people don't talk about this publicly, this sort of game-like attitude towards things in life, like your career or your money, it is quite common in people in our social set. And I know this from working with clients. Like, but people do not talk about it publicly because the optics are bad, right? Like you cannot get on Twitter and be like, money is just this like game, because 10 seconds later, all these people are going to be all over your ass. Like, oh, well, you know what? Money is not a game to so-and-so who has 3 minimum wage jobs just to like get to the grocery store to use her food stamps, you know?
Right.
So it looks like disrespectful. But I would hope that my children would find a way to like hold things lightly. That's where resilience comes from. You know, this is like a whole thing, like grit and resilience and whatever. It's like you have to find a way to like really care about things that matter, but then also not be too damaged when they don't go the way you expected.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of holding things lightly, but not too lightly.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it's probably the type of thing that is a little more like show than tell.
Right.
It's a little more show than tell. I think if I had to like sum something up in like a discrete lesson, it's usually that, like, even though you can't literally do anything, and I can't look a child in the eye and be like, you can do whatever you want, you can be whatever you want, like that's passé, like that's over. There's so many possibilities for what you can do and be that are like they're just illegible, you know, like they're not even on your radar yet. The possibilities are not even sort of on your radar when you're like 10, 15, even 20. Right. What your life might be like, or what its components might be. So that's part of why being flexible is necessary, because you don't know yet what you might value or what you might be able to do, or what sort of opportunities might come in your way that even if they don't really like fit with what you thought before, they might be worth trying. If you have too like rigid of a narrative, then you can't accommodate those things in a fruitful way.
It's interesting. This landscape is completely crazy. I don't know if you're noticing this stuff. It's just totally alien. I feel like in my life, the thing I've struggled with is, it's not so much the like you can do anything. Oh no, you actually can't. It's like my version of wanting to do this or wanting to do that was not even. Oh, we lost somebody. Thanks for coming by, 𝕬𝕤𝕚𝕚𝕚. It's like my ideas were not even formatted in terms of something that like the reality machine could accept. That's kind of how I think about it. It's sort of like, I don't know. I've been thinking about this a bunch this year because I've had a lot of free time in the last year, which in practice kind of means you don't have any free time because you're always a little bit stressed about how do I make this more awesome, use this somehow. But there's a way in which I would have these instincts about what I wanted to do that didn't come from a sense of what was actually available to me now. And I feel like I'm learning to connect the dots. It's like, for example, it's like rather than starting from what would be like the best project ever, it's like what is my current project? How do I improve it? How do I advance it? How do I advance it in a different way? That's just a thing I've been thinking about, which I don't know if you get questions like that, but from clients, sort of about like practical, like how do I do cool projects? If you get questions from that direction.
Yeah, I think I sometimes meet people who have a sense that they see other people, especially online, like getting interesting opportunities and like trying different things, and like they're hooked into different social groups, they're hooked into different like side hustles or startups or whatever, and they sort of feel like they don't know they know this is a thing, it's not like a thing their parents told them they could do when they grow up, but they like don't know how to get in on it. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of tough because it does require like a certain element of luck, but most people are just like so black and white thinking about so many things, sort of like the mother of all cognitive distortions, that they think that like even if something is admittedly luck based, that means that like they shouldn't try at it because they can't have like full control or full ownership of the outcome. Like that's clearly false. When it's put in those terms, it's clearly false. Like you don't have to have like some grand plan or some idea of how something's going to turn out. Usually just being more clued in to what you're actually doing or who you actually know already. If you can invest in those things, it will take you all kinds of crazy places. It just always sort of starts in the actual. And this is maybe one of the drums that I beat as a philosopher. It's like you can't live like a good life in the abstract, or like you can't be an interesting person in the abstract, or like have cool opportunities per se. Instead, it's always like, well, which people might be interesting for you to know, like which opportunities might be hovering in your existing spheres. Like those are the things that really like sort of extend value out to you, and that's where you need to be honing your sort of like, it's really sort of perceptual, like to see what those things are, and to not be stuck in the abstract level.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the thing. I feel like I hear this and it's just sort of like this wisdom's floating around, but it's such a weird, unintuitive, like psychological action to find I don't know, I think about a lot of things in those terms. It's like, what is the actual mental move? Like, how do you find the real thing to do? But then I'm like, am I overthinking this?
No overthinking. It's so fun. Like this is like literally my job. I mean, if someone came to me like this and they have sort of vague complaints or like vague FOMO about like, they feel like they should have better hobbies or better like projects or better friends or whatever. I mean, I try to take that very seriously in one way and sort of more lightly in another way. So very seriously is like, okay, your emotions are telling you that like you're missing, you have some hole in your life, and we're gonna take that at face value until proven otherwise, which it may be. It may turn out to, be fake or something, but let's just take it at face value for now. But then they say something like, oh, I like made the wrong educational choice a long time ago, and that's why this isn't right for me, or like I live in the wrong city, or like my best friend ghosted me or something. And it's like, I don't know what the mental move, I don't know how to describe the mental move abstractly, which is like, how do you get out of this rut? How do you move from like this smaller life than you'd like to have to the richer one? But we can literally like just brute force it, which is like go down the list. Like, so what are you doing? Who do you know? And then inevitably, every time, there's always like some organization that they belong to, but like have been timid about getting involved in. Or there's some interesting friend who like asked them to get coffee, but they're stressed out about it because they think they're not cool enough, so they didn't write them back. Like, if you just are invited to think about this like in a dead serious way, a whole list of those types of things will always come up. And so it's like, those are actually actionable. Like, if you follow up with that person and you have that coffee, or if you make a little time each day to go to that online community, or if you catch up with that person from your past, like, I can't guarantee you what would happen. Like, I don't know what payoffs those things will have.
Right.
But it's definitely positive, and it's the type of thing that is behind the curtain of what other people were doing that got them to their rich by your standards lives that you're sort of peering in on.
It's kind
and so that's a coachable thing, right? So like I just like, what are those things? When can you do them?
Right.
Like, when do you want me to follow up with you? Like, and then maybe the person did it, maybe they didn't, and we're kind of like, okay, well, why didn't you do it? If you didn't do it because of a bad reason, like you chickened out, then here I am forcing you to do it still.
Right.
If you didn't do it because you got busy with some other thing, then that's the whole problem we were trying to solve. So like, that's fine.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's a version of oyster smiling compared to anxiety. There's sort of like a type of anxiety which is, so I'll give my version, is like, what business idea should I do? That's like a type of anxiety loop. And there's a mindset which is me being anxious, thinking, what business idea should I do? There's where I'm not looking at business ideas. Right? I'm not going through my list and being like, oh no, all 12 of these are bad. I'm not even getting that far. I'm just not thinking about it. I'm just like, what business idea should I do? You know what I'm saying? And then versus, I like your, let's actually just go down the list. It sort of a little bit feels like calling the bluff of the anxiety spiral or something. It's like, I have a friend who, one of his heuristics, I just talked to this guy about, we talk about like emotional stuff now and then. It's like, his heuristic is, okay, what's the thing you're most afraid of in this circumstance? It's true. Now what?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, I think so like, it's important to try out all those things, and also keep in mind that even if you sort of like are going to try all these things and follow all these trails to get what you think you want, I also keep it very firmly in view that like, you may still be anxious and feel like life is meaningless at the end of it. Like, none of these things are like silver bullets. Like, many of us are just fundamentally anxious people.
Right.
It comes and goes. It can be dealt with in various ways.
Right.
But even if you're still anxious, then you would be anxious and have a better life of being anxious and having a worse life. Or
Right.
so like, why don't we try? I think it's I'm very uncomfortable with like motivating people by inviting them to imagine that like, this will solve your problem. Like, what is your problem? We can state it discreetly. What are the types of things that would solve it? Okay, those things would solve it. So like, let's do that. I don't really think that that's the way any of this stuff works. But that doesn't mean we do nothing. We don't do nothing either.
We had a couple questions and thoughts in the chat. I don't know. Well, Morgan Anastasia said, if you can see, there's the, what should I do if I'm a directionless 26-year-old who's sort of generally smart with a generalist liberal arts degree, but I don't know what to do with my life? I can't tell if that's a meme. I do. The answer is, I don't know. Food service. No. I don't know. I don't know if you have
I
a
mean,
stock answer for that. That's sort of maybe impossible.
Like when I meet people like that, I mean, I don't know in a top-down way how to say, oh, you should choose such and such a goal because like it sounds good, or it's what you thought you maybe used to want to do, or like it pays a lot or whatever, and then just go, frantically pursue that thing. I think that that's like sort of a recipe for disaster in most cases. But again, it's just very rooted in the actual. So like most people like that would have some pathways, like maybe they know someone who's someone who's casually mentioned like, oh, do you want to come work at my company or whatever? And they've written it off because it sort of like doesn't fit their idea of what they might want to do. Or sometimes families have businesses and you sort of like discounted those from a narrative perspective. Or most of this, the way I would encapsulate this at a high level is that I tend to find myself encouraging people to be more open towards path dependencies in their life, which is to say, you don't just like wake up and decide what would be good to do and then like plan it backwards and go get it. Instead, the reality of the situation is that many of these things are determined like by just sort of like these branching paths that are out of our control, that like we didn't choose. And that's sort of like just make your peace with it, And maybe that takes you somewhere that you never imagined you would go, but like it's probably better than here.
So it's sort of something like grounding it in, reality. It's like grounding it in the available paths and being willing to. There's this comic. I don't know if you've ever heard of this comic, ℙ𝕙𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. Some people here have probably read it. It's this person who, they're these really kind of like sci-fi sort of fantasy realism, whatever. One of the comics is called Arnold Creeley, about this kid who's named Ronald, who lost his R as a boy and was sort of like directionless ever since or something. And it's this person is haunted by all of these specters of things that he could be, and all these could be ghosts like follow him around, and he ends up becoming I think they call it like a never was, where he basically is like a hobo, and he's just sort of like a hobo who never picked a thing. Anyway, it's a very, as far as I can tell, very modern complex, and I'm definitely been guilty of it. I think I was probably fascinated by this comic because I'm get fucked up by that. But I like the path dependency thing. I guess there's no simple answers here. It's like I want there to be some kind of like consequential spiritual lesson that solves, that is like the perfect reagent to solve that thing. But who knows? We'll get it someday.
Yeah. I think we're sort of like so to just be like totally crude and disgusting about like the historical arc, it's like, okay, there was some time and place where like, your dad was a blacksmith or whatever. So like you became a blacksmith, you were sort of like slotted straightforwardly into some role. And it was like very legible, very certain, very available, but lacking in, you didn't get to choose it, and maybe it's not a great fit for you in some way, and you might have wanted to be able to choose it even if you actually like it, but it would have been better if you could have done it freely. This is like sort of a modern view. And so whatever historical forces like free us from a lot of that, which seems really great for a while, and then we get like all this ennui and indecision, but like we can't actually even revert to the thing where you just do what your dad did or whatever. Like that's not actually available. So instead, now we're at this stage in the game where it's like you do have some wide degree of freedom and volition. You also have some paths that are sort of more available to you than others, and you have to just make sense. You have to make sense of it. And it's not plainly one thing or the other. It's not plainly like you just choose and like follow your heart. your desires or like will lead you the right way, and it's also not. You just get slotted in. It's either the best of both worlds or also it may be the worst of both worlds, but like we're stuck.
Yeah, I do like this idea. It's very fascinating to imagine. I think I was raised pretty much in the direction of you can be anything you want. I think that's kind of the message I got. And it's interesting to imagine being raised with no, like something that was like a lot more, I don't want to say my parents prepared me poorly for the world or anything, because they didn't, but I think much more in the direction of like, no, it's like limited, just make good calls, something more like that.
Yeah.
Taking a look at the questions. We might have kind of covered this, but Mono Device said, how's the coaching for smart people? How does it actually work? What does the process look like? What's your job in general? And Visa plus one of that and said, what are the recurring issues that show up? You said a little bit, but if you want to go deeper on any of that, I'm interested. Also on the recurring issues.
Yeah.
Though we've also set up some of those.
Yeah. So the way, we've covered a little bit of this, but basically the way it works is like, someone's lurking around me online. They have something they want to talk about. They buy the intro session. I send them this questionnaire. The questionnaire has questions like, what's bothering you the most right now? Like, what have you tried already to solve it? Do you have like recurring problems or patterns of some kind in your life? Just sort of basic questions.
Right.
And then what it usually turns out is that people have some problem of this kind that I've described as the existential sandwich.
Right.
Here, I'll send you guys this link. So people have sort of practical problems like choices or productivity or whatever, and they're all mixed up with like their big stuff like time anxiety or like mortality or something like that.
Yeah.
And so basically, here, I'll send you guys another link.
And I'll drop these in my Discord, where there'll be
cool
for anyone watching on YouTube. So join the Discord and get these links.
Let me find it. So basically, I've tried to describe this method in the abstract, and I wasn't sure about this blog post, but I've actually had a bunch of people tell me that they found it useful. So I think maybe it must make some sense even at a high level. But basically, this time boxing method is supposed to be some kind of way of like treating your existential thing or your core problem as sort of like a hypothesis and seeing what you can try in your life that will either get you new information about the practical problem or shift or budge the existential thing. Because it's just like too stressful to always be thinking about practical things and also always be thinking about existential things. So that's very abstract, but like, here's what I mean in reality. A lot of people have a job that is partially good and that they also partially don't like. And this raises questions for them because they're like thinky people about like, am I doing what I should be doing with my life? Am I like wasting my life? Would things be better for me like intellectually or emotionally or whatever if I had work that were more like congruent with my interests? Or like, should I just try to treat work as just like I get my paycheck and I go home and like actually sort of downgrade it as an important thing, right? So they're facing all this stuff at the same time. So what this looks like is like, okay, Monday you go to work, like something went on fire over the weekend, you like hate your job and it's terrible, and you're like, oh, I'm wasting my life. And then you sit behind your computer, and then Wednesday you had like some team meeting and you realize that your progress on the project is actually pretty okay. And then you're like, oh, actually I like this job. It's pretty good. I'm pretty good at it. I think I'll just stay, right? Mm-hmm. And then Thursday you like have coffee with someone who has a job that's cooler than you, and it sounds way more intellectually interesting. Then you're like, oh no, I'm wasting my life, right? So it's just this giant mess of like hypotheses about what is good for you, choices you could make, None of them are like time bound. It's just like a big mess.
Right.
And people can go on in these low level situations for like a really long time. They can inhabit situations like this for years. And they're always considering both like the practical stuff and the choices and also the like philosophical stuff behind it. So what I would encourage someone like this to do is, for instance,
Chat's having an existential crisis, so maybe you can help them.
Like you have to find some way to figure out what like your hypothesis is about what would be good for you or what's meaningful or whatever, and then like get new information about it or test it. Sometimes they end up suggesting to people that they do things like they have assumptions about what some other type of work is like. And I'm like, do you know anyone who does that work? Like, could you ask them?
This is
Can
useful.
You, like, you know, like, can you Google, like, people are going to be on Reddit, like, talking about what that work is like. Can you, like, look it up? And it's so interesting because, like, these are things that everyone knows you can do. You know, any moment you're holding your phone, you're doing any one of those things. But once you're sort of, like, inhabiting the loop, you just, like, the more times you go around, you're, like, digging into the ground, you know, and you, like, can't see anymore, like, what you might do. So the question is, like, how can we make any of these things, like, empirical and get information about them? And how can we test it in ways that are, like, sort of small? Like, it sounds silly, but, you know, like, people will think that they want to, like, go do something artistic, and they haven't actually done that type of art for, like, a long time.
Right.
And it's not completely silly because it's like, okay, you're fried from, like, your big job that's in something else. But it's like, I think if it were really important to you, you could find a way to reintroduce some element of your creative practice, you know, and, like, see how it went. And if we try for some weeks to do that, like, to reintroduce your creative practice, and it's not taking, then it's time to make a choice about it, but the choice is to let it go. Right? Like, that's the fork you're at. And it's painful in a way, you know, like, that's a loss. That's the choice that you come to, but it's much more, it can be freeing in a way compared to just, like, rehearsing the same dilemma over and over. So that's what I would say is, like, sort of the basic situation. And then people come up with, like, you know, there's all manner of stuff in between, like, you know, maybe they've decided to stay at their job for 6 months and try such and such to, like, make it go better, with the understanding that if when the 6 months are up and it still sucks, they will consider doing something else. But we're going to, like, give it 6 months where you're not just, like, rehearsing all these different choices because it's too tiring. So in that 6 months, they need help with things like, what are ways I can manage my time? Like, what are ways I could manage my relationship with my boss and, like, kind of manage up? I mean, I'm not like an expert at these things, but sometimes all it takes is someone to be like, hey, could you, like, have a one-on-one with them? Or, like, how about a Trello board? You know, it's so amazing how little you have to do at times to get people to think of possibilities. They just get so stuck, and talking to a person is sort of, like, inordinately powerful, even if it's just someone. It has to be someone who you kind of, like, have rapport with and sort of like and respect, but the stuff they say doesn't have to be magical. This is another post I've been meaning to write. It's probably going to be called, like, the meat body effect, right? It's like there's something about just, like, talking to a human person who's not you that, like, brings out like much more careful thinking. And it's sort of, like, silly that would be the case. Like, why can't you just, like, stand in your bathroom and, like, talk to yourself in the mirror?
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like, well, if it's the case, like, we can exploit this. You know, like, you can and should exploit this.
Totally.
Here I am. I'm your meat body. Like, let's talk about it.
Totally. Yeah, the closest hack, it's bullshit to call this a hack, but the closest hack I have for getting some of the benefits of talking to another person are talking to God. I mean, and that's a works for me because of a very idiosyncratic system I built up around it and how I think about that and what it means. And I was an atheist for the longest time, and I'm still kind of sort of an atheist, and it's blah, 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 blah. And it gets some of it, but at the same time, I still get, there's just stuff I can't get to. I mean, I think of even the talking to God type stuff, I think it reflects through our own psychology in any case, and sort of we're limited. But the, yeah, I mean, we need other people. Yeah, Oyster said something like, I feel like every time I think I really should be doing X and don't do it, it's another L. Yeah, I mean, in response to that, I liked what you said, Pamela, about the sort of like, there's something like boxing the amount of anguish you're allowed to do about something by connecting it to like a real test or a, you know, like with the art example.
Yeah, it's basically like to try to alternate between times when you are like trying things and then times when you are thinking and integrating and deciding, right? Because like if you're always sort of trying things and you're also always just like thinking, I mean, we don't notice the times when that works because it worked, but people come to me in these muddles because it's not working to be always sort of trying and also always sort of thinking of it. It's just like tiring.
Right. Right.
So that's sort of how you get a path forward that takes some time, but is not just like more of the same.
Sweet. Yeah. Yeah. Time boxing. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think this has me reflecting on my own setup, because I kind of have like a cycle of sort of like different friends I talk to, and it is kind of scheduled. And I just always wonder if it's optimized enough or what I could do to improve it. Oh my God! Someone figured out how to put a crazy character in chat. What the hell? It's so weird. What's up, W? Thank you for that contribution. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I've been sort of seeing your car adventures through like kind of like Facebook and just Twitter and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you like, have you always been into cars? Are you like a car person?
Yes and no. So my dad, who died, was like a car guy, and he, when he was young, he like had all these hot rods and like rebuilt them, and I think like did some racing on public streets that my mom told him not to tell us about. And basically like they got married and they had me and my brother, and my mom like made him sell us fun cars, and it was like sort of terrible. And when I was growing up, we had like a Plymouth Voyager minivan and like a red Ford Taurus station wagon, with the rear facing third row, like super retro, like really boring, like regular family cars. But my dad would sometimes go to NASCAR races, which is like frankly a redneck activity. But like he liked the cars, like he liked the technology, and he took me to the Daytona 500 when I was a senior in high school, and it was such a bummer. It was the shortest Daytona 500 in history. Rain, and they ended up calling it like right after the number of laps where it could be like finished if they couldn't go back after the rain, whatever. So I don't actually know a lot about cars, but I always enjoyed, like compared to my brother, I was the one who enjoyed this stuff. And I sort of like wanted to learn from him, but like it didn't always stick. And we just didn't have cool cars when I was growing up. So when he and my mom got divorced when I was an adult, he bought a white Camaro. And then after that, he traded it in. He got a Corvette, like a brand new Corvette. This must have been 2017 or so. And that thing was just gorgeous. It's just, like it's not tiny, it's kind of big, but it's like incredibly fast, and you like fall into it. Like you're like in a cockpit, and I don't really know like how much he drove it towards the end of his life, but it was one of the sadder things when he was sick is that I drove it a couple of times, and one time I went to start it and like it was dead, and I had to take it to get the battery charged because it had like been leaking. It hadn't been driven a long time, whatever. And I ended up being the one who had to drive it to a storage unit. And like I backed it into the storage unit when we were moving him out of his house, and he still thought that he was gonna like go home and drive again and stuff. And I knew he was never gonna drive any car again. And it was just so sad. I backed this Corvette into this storage unit in August of 2018 and just like cried. I drove it past the assisted living, like where he was. It was so sad. And of course, at the time I lived in New York City, and we didn't have a car. I'd never been responsible for a car as an adult ever. It just is the way it went. So when I was visiting him, I enjoyed driving these rental cars. And on Father's Day of that year when he was sick, he told me to try to rent one of these Dodge Challengers. And it was really neat because I got one, and the physical therapists were able to get him out of the hospital, and he came and sat in the Challenger, and they wouldn't let him drive around the hospital parking lot. It's like so fucked up. I should have just done it anyway. But so we sort of had this thing going about the rental cars I was driving, like I had some dumb BMW SUV and all this stuff. And I rented a convertible that summer. To see him one of the times. And in those rental car fleets, they're mostly Mustangs and Camaros, the convertibles. But I showed up at the Atlanta airport. It was like 2 a.m. some night in July, and they had a Miata. And it was a new one. It was like the newest body style, which is like an ND, it's called. And I got into this Miata. And of course, these visits were just like gut-wrenching. Like I would have to really psych up for them, and I like drink on the plane. And I got in that Miata, and they showed me how to open the hardtop, and I started driving north from the airport to my dad's house, which was like about a 40-minute drive. It was like 2 a.m. on this summer night, and I was just like, this is incredible. like I'm like, if the thing about the Miata is that like you're so low, you feel like you're sitting on the road, but because it's a convertible, like the whole sky is right there. So it's like, it feels very connected to the experience that you would be like on the road and also in the middle of an open sky. Miatas are not super powerful. They're sort of dinky little cars, like people make fun of it. So what's fun about it is that you can just floor it left and right. And in like a Corvette, if you floor it left and right, you'll be going like 100 miles an hour. But in a Miata, you're perfectly fine. You can just put the pedal way down all the time. So I had rented this Miata, and anyway, fast forward a few years, I sort of half wanted to keep my dad's Corvette, but in New York, it just made no sense. It was sold before I could drive it again, and like that was just as well after his death. So we moved to Austin last year, and we got like a family car. Our family car is this Volvo. It's like a Volvo station wagon, and it's super nice. Like it has a lot of bells and whistles, like parking sensors and like a camera that goes all around. A big panoramic roof. It's a super nice car. And I was enjoying driving regularly again. And then like in the fall, I just got to thinking, it was around my dad's birthday. And I was kind of like, hell, how much could I sort of just want a convertible. Like, can I just like go buy a convertible? And I went on Carvana, and they sell used cars in this way that like you don't have to talk to anyone, and they just like credit check you online, and it's no big deal. And they just had like a billion Miatas at like relatively affordable prices. It costs like a little more than if you bought it person to person, but it's all like checked and stuff. So I clicked like 3 buttons on my phone, and I bought this gray Miata in November, and you're allowed to have like a 7-day test drive where you can just give it back if you don't want it and they don't charge you anything. So I'm like, okay, I'll just like drive it and I'll get it inspected, and if there's any problem, I'll just like give it right back.
Right.
But of course, like I took one look at it I had the inspection. It was totally fine. And so yeah, I drive it most days. I like take it out after my kids are in bed. I put the top down and I just go like pick up groceries. I mean, it's like, it's sort of silly, but I think it's just like sort of such a pleasant and centered experience to be driving around in there with the top down that like it would be worth even far more money to me. And I'm really pleased that I was able to do that, you know, with the money that I earn. It's really it's sort of like a mental health thing.
Yeah.
To just be able to like shed the house, shed the kids, like be someone else, like get in my car, no baby seats, just go like tool around. It's great.
This is making me want to be in a convertible. I might have to go drive. Probably not tonight. I drank, but yeah.
When I see people with their tops up, I feel like it's just like a crime against nature, you know? Like
Yeah.
I drove that thing with the top down all through the winter. I mean, it didn't get that cold. It's Texas, you know, like it was maybe like 40 degrees, a few times 35 degrees. I had to buy like all these headbands because like your hair all whips in your eyes. I have all these like thick headbands and I like put my hair up like this and I like,
Right.
It's just, I think it's the type of thing where like some people don't get it. Like my husband doesn't get it. He didn't even ride in it for like a month. He just like doesn't care. But if you get it,
You get it,
like
you get it.
if you get it, you get it. And it's the type of thing where unless you are super distracted, you can actually enjoy it that much every single time. Like I have not desensitized to this pleasure because there's so many aspects of like getting into the car and enjoying driving it that invite me to sort of remember that it's like special. You know, like I get the keys. I get the Mazda key instead of the Volvo key. Like I get into the car, I like put my phone on the dash thing, and I do the top, like the power hard top, like takes a few seconds. It's like, it's sort of ritualized, right? It's like whatever happened in the house or whatever, it's like messy and the kids are screaming or whatever, but like, this is me time, like have whatever my music I want. I'm like gonna go walk around the grocery store alone. It's very, I think that if I heard someone saying stuff like this 10 years ago, I would have thought it was kind of pathetic, you know, like why is this woman like so desperate to like have a little fun at night, like away from her kids, like going to buy milk. But I sort of, you know, like you have to play the cards you've got, and I don't have much free time. I need it for it to be like really good, and this is one of the ways to do that.
I mean, it's a vibe, right? I mean, I feel like life is full of these moments where you're just like vibing, and when that feels right, it's like, who cares that you're getting milk? It's like even better, you know? Like, I don't know. It's like something about it. It's making me think of my dad because he, our whole family's in the Chicago area, and you know, it's often freezing fucking cold here. And my dad will drive with like the window open when it's so cold, and like there's like, I don't know, it's just having me think about it, I guess because of like the windows down thing, where it's like I come back from like California and I'm like, we're gonna go somewhere, so I like get in the car and he's waiting for the car to warm up with like the door open. I'm like, Dad, like, like what are you doing? I'm like the life is leaving my body. It's like so cold. He's like, oh yeah. I don't know. I just think about this adaptation to weather thing, because like even my mom, it's like both my parents, they're like quite adapted to the cold to a degree that I think I lost it at some point, or I don't know.
Yeah. My dad used to say that because he and my mom met in Boston, and then they raised us in Georgia, right? So like when he was younger, they were like, oh, the cold's like not a big deal, you know, you like turn on your heat, life goes on. And even in Georgia, especially towards the end of his life, just even the slightest cool just seemed like wildly intolerable to him. But of course, it was confounded by many things. But
right.
Even when I was learning how to drive, I had this like just like a big Chevy sedan called 𝔬𝕚, and it didn't have power windows. So before I would drive, I would walk around to all 4 doors and roll the windows down.
Mm.
And it's like, there's just something about that like slice of like wind in your hair, like being moving. I just love to be moving, and you feel more like you're moving when you're exposed to the outside. When you're sort of shut up in the car, it's like very like pod people, like let's just get there.
Yeah. Screwing with our weather a little bit. Yeah, the pod. I remember when COVID started, I had a friend who would like to... We would just get around, and just... There's something good about being in the pod of the car. You know, like we're isolated from the world, and we can just get around. But that was early on when it was still a little bit exciting. Now I'm just like sick of it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
Soren doesn't enjoy driving. He's not one who gets it. Yeah, I'm not like... I don't love it like so much, but I've had great driving moments. I've had, and that's often a lot of times driving at night, which is bad for a number of reasons. But sometimes when it's like, especially like on a warm night, that can be quite enjoyable, I find. RVs are a vibe. Well, Pamela, what should I ask you? Or do you want to ask me anything, or do you want to ask chat anything?
I don't know. I feel pretty good about this conversation. You guys haven't asked me any questions that are like, you know, you haven't stumped me or like embarrassed me or something. Thank goodness. I sort of like, we talked about this a little earlier, Michael, how like where you came from, how we ended up following each other on Twitter. I still think it's sort of half amazing and like half, of course it's this way, that people can just sort of come on the scene and you just sort of like know when they're the right fit, like to be a member of your social circle. If only in, you know, the Twitter way or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I'm still trying to sort of figure out, like, I don't know how to ask you, like, who are you actually?
Yeah.
Without getting this weird answers like, well, I went to school here and like I grew up there, which is sort of not.
Well, let's iterate on the question.
Part of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you say, who are you actually? And then I say, well, I grew up here, I went to school here. And then you say, no, but then what's the next version of the question?
Right. I mean, what I'd be really asking if I said something like that is, well, and we talked about this a little, I sort of want to know why and how are you socially relevant to me? Like to me, not just like I'm interested in your story, like for its own sake. Like how and why are you socially relevant to me? And like basically, how correct am I that we are sort of you know, like on the same wavelengths, which I don't actually have doubts about, but
right. Okay, and then I can go from the non-answer to the real answer at any point. But the way I would answer that would be, okay, how am I socially relevant to you? That's an interesting question. I'm trying to understand it. It's sort of like, I think I know what you mean. It's like, well, the answer I could give is kind of boring, but it's sort of like, well, we know some, well, okay, we're both on Twitter. Right. We're both kind of philosophical. We both have some writing. There's a shared interest in how the mind works and kind of, I feel like, anyway, I could list some stuff like that. We both know Divya, who was on the show earlier. Right. And is that kind of what you're asking for with the how are we relevant?
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I mean, I don't actually have doubts about this because otherwise I wouldn't like be here and you would have asked me and I wouldn't have agreed and stuff. But you know, like some people seem to have this ability to like get genuinely interested in any arbitrarily selected other person, like for their own sake.
Right.
And I think that's actually like an interesting exception. I think the much more standard thing is sort of like, oh, like how do you hook into my stuff?
Right.
Where that can be interpreted broadly. It doesn't have to be like, you know, my work or like my biological family or whatever.
Well, one layer to the thing is, if I had to talk about myself for 3 hours a week, I would just run out of things to say. So I get to kick back and get someone else to kind of do their thing. That's one layer to the answer. But
yeah,
part of it a little bit is I'm interested in something like, I'm like vexed by the sort of, I think, knowledge that we're like not reaching our potential as a species, and this is like a thing I think about and have complexes about. And one of the things that interests me is like, when do people like kind of perk up? Like what kind of like wakes them up and they're like jazzed about something? Because when are people interesting and when are they engaged? I'm kind of interested in that sort of like attention a little bit. I think this is probably an extension of like, kind of like, you know, I was always trying to get attention, you know. I was class clown type, you know, kid, and I would do stupid stuff, right? Even younger than that. This now, you could think about this from a mom perspective. If you ever have this with your kids, I hope you don't. But I would do gross things to get attention. My reputation, and I loved this. I loved having this reputation. Like first grade was being gross, and I would stick rocks up my nose and shoot them out. I did the whole thing. And at a certain point, I had one of these experiences where some people were laughing at me, and I was like, wait a second, something feels off. Why does this not feel right? There's something wrong with this laughing at me. Like, and I think I just remember having this conversation with my mom. She's like, well, there's good attention and bad attention. And I was like, holy shit, you know. And
whoa, if true.
yeah, it's big if true. So I think that's a little bit, I don't know, do I seem like somebody who's interested in people? If I am, that's a little bit part of it. Is there's something about when social stuff is really juicy, I like that. And when it's sort of when the wires connect and so I don't know, that's part of why I do this show, is because I'm kind of experimenting with it. It's like, what can I do to create like I feel like I'm in the lab. I'm always like toying with I'm tweaking the amount of gas in the lobby, you know, and the nice smelling vanilla scented, you know, whatever, and the music and the stuff. And then maybe that shows up for individuals. Like when does the individual like get on something that interests them? I don't know. I just said a bunch of stuff. Does that seem like related?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I hadn't actually like paused to think like, what is Michael up to with this? Because it's sort of you know, it's not unusual to me that someone would just be messing around with stuff and like talking to people. Like that strikes me in particular as totally normal. But like, for instance, my mom, who I always butt heads with, like she can't interpret things like someone talking online or making posts. She's unwilling or unable to interpret those as anything other than just like sheer narcissism. Right? Like, so to her, every instance of people doing something like this gets coded as like, I want people to hear me talk, or like I want people looking at me or whatever.
Right.
And so I'm sort of glad that I don't have that kind of background assumption now that I notice it. But yeah, I mean, like it's conversation. I mean, here I'll leave you guys another link. This was sort of like the first post that I wrote on my blog when I was launching my business. Was this one called ritualized conversation. It was basically supposed to be like a theory about what it does when you formalize a conversational setting, like for a specific purpose. So this is sort of like therapy, but it's also other things. And it's like when you make it formal, you reduce a lot of things like ambiguity about who's talking when, or like whose purposes are being pursued first or whatever. Right. And that makes it possible to sort of like get different other things out of the encounter than you otherwise would. And so now that I think about it, I mean, these shows of yours are really like interviews are a form of ritualized conversation. Totally. Where like it's not happening randomly, right? Like you have some purpose for doing it at all, but it is the frame and sort of the structure of the thing is that it's not just you talking for 3 hours every Tuesday. It's that you have the responsibility and the privilege of like coming up with questions and like hosting people and then letting them talk to some extent, and that helps to get something different out of it than it otherwise would be.
Yeah, I would love to talk about like the DNA of Philosophers and Twitch playing Flight Simulator. Like, because I think about it a lot, but it would be too long to just like keep going on that. But there's something in what you said that made me have a thought. It's layers within layers, right? So if we're really getting into it, it's sort of we're just chilling, right? But is there a purpose? You know, I think for me, it serves the higher purpose for us to just be chilling. So I try to gate the purpose a little bit there, right? Because there's things I want to get out of it, but I don't want to pull them too hard out of the people that show up. I'm very interested in like scenes and stuff though. So this is a little bit part of it where, for what it's worth, I was streaming on Twitch a bunch. I at least like 20 times I would stream games and get 0 or 1 viewer, right? Mm. And when I started having people on, then people showed up to see the people. And there was a little bit of like, who are the Twitter people? Like, what do they actually like? And that's, as I understand it, that's part of the value add, is what do these people actually like? You get some sense of it. And to me, I think the way I think of it is that there's some possibility of more community. It's like we already have some community-like thing with Twitter, right? And then there's a question of how robust could it be and how good could it be and how much can that be real? And I don't know that it has to be the same thing as real life community either. I think in spaces it does. I mean, this is a totally different thing, but you met your husband at OkCupid, like that's cool, right? You know what I mean? And who is it? Lisa Tomic and what's his name? Antonio. Recently. So I'm interested in that, and I think COVID to contextualize it a bit for me as well, because everyone's missing out on human stuff. So I'm a little bit curious to know like what happens like when things open up. I think I do want to keep trying to run the show but the current plan still is like sort of indefinitely. But I wonder what'll change, or I don't know, who knows? Maybe I can go to places in person and like actually chill, have the person next to me, let them hold the controller,
Oh yeah, you should come through Austin. Austin's fantastic.
Yeah.
This is a great town. I mean, certainly online community, it's not the same. It's not nothing. People are trying to find what holes it fills and what it sort of leaves, what itches it leaves unscratched, right? Like, what social problem or lack do you have that no amount of weird niche discords or slacks or anything, like, if you spent all day on them, something might still not be filled. What is it? Right.
Right.
Some people feel it, some don't. And if someone says they don't, I'm inclined to take that at face value. It's been sort of weird for me since COVID, because when we were still in New York, I mean, initial lockdown in New York was just beyond horrendous for me. I think you saw my blog post about that. And so one thing that was ultra frustrating is that we had no nanny for like 12 weeks because they shut New York, they shut the preschool, and they were like, stay home. And there were literally ambulances like all day and night for like 2 months. I mean, I don't really know how to describe it to people. Like, there were refrigerator trucks like in the road, and there were ambulances all day and night. Like, I kept client calls a little bit during that time, even though I was tempted to kind of shut. It's like, I should keep going with my business. I won't regret this. And like, my clients were like calling me from like Berlin and shit, and they were like, wow, there's a lot of ambulances there. Like,
Right.
It was not in my head. And due to like the total demands of young children, I was not even able to attend most of these online things. It was like, okay, there's no real world anymore. They shut New York, which is like not a thing I thought they could ever do.
Yeah.
And then all your friends are like having Zooms, and like you can't even catch it because like your kids are always screaming.
Yeah.
It was really a bummer, because everyone else is like, oh, Zoom fatigue, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, maybe once a week I try to catch something, and then I can't even. And I think it just goes to show like how disparate the impact has been, and how different people's reconfigured social lives in this way have been. So I have noticed, I mean, I always offer people a regular phone call instead of a Zoom. I don't have a strong preference, but I mean, like, I'm a little distracted during a Zoom. There's like a small element of like performance anxiety when someone's paying you to talk to them. Sort of like, oh, I better come up with like something smart, or like they'll think they wasted their money or whatever. It's not a huge fear, especially as I continue in my business. It's a little bit there, but Zoom got normalized. It got like normalized as default. And so some people now like specifically want a phone call because they're like, I just need to like get out and walk while we do our coaching call. I'm like, I need a break from Zoom. But then I'm alone, and I'm sort of like, oh, maybe I'd like, sort of like to see someone.
Right.
It's just been so just totally disparate.
Right. Yeah. Phone calls.
But
yeah.
I had a meeting with someone I met from Twitter a while ago. And like, when I used to live in New York pre-pandemic, I would meet people from Twitter like constantly, you know, like I'd attend meetups, like things at bars, like birthday parties, whatever. And I'm not the center of any social network. I'm just like a lurker, but it was very easy to do. Yeah. And it was so funny because like, it was this woman who only has like 300 or 400 followers. Mm-hmm. And she invited me over to her house, and I roll up, and I didn't know what the nice way to ask it was. I sort of wanted to be like, have you ever met anyone from Twitter before? Because I'm Twitter famous, and I do this all the time. Uh-huh. Thankfully, she like kind of got it, but like she hadn't, you know. And it's sort of easy to forget that it's still not normal for a lot of people. Just they're not used to it, or they're like in a city where there aren't so much density or whatever.
I mean, the amount, so I was already like, you know, I mean, I don't even know I'm trying to remember my pre-Twitter life. I'm like, what even was that? It's like, I texted friends, I was in some group chats, I'm in some Discord-ish things, and I sort of used Facebook, but that was that. Like, I read Twitter a little bit, which is the weirdest thing in the world, to just read Twitter. But anyway, no. We like those people. But during the pandemic, I've almost like tiled my entire experience with technological like alternates to real social interaction, where it's like I'm always on a thing. I mean, running the Twitch show is itself a weird kind of type of, it takes extroversion energy, and I do get wiped afterwards, but it's also still different from it's from a social thing in person. Like, if I were talking for 3 hours in front of people in the flesh, I think I might feel more tired. It's a little hard to tell, but it does. At the end of the day, here I am in front of my computer, right? But also we get something through the internet. It's very strange. It's all very strange. But yeah, no, I mean, but people who aren't very on, like Twitter itself, I've been using way more during the pandemic. People who really are not online, I'm confused about, like, what are they doing? a little bit. Obviously, they're doing their other life and stuff, but like, what's their social thing? You know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just still so diverse. Like, some people have maintained some level of in-person interaction, especially if they have like family nearby.
Right.
They may have never stopped seeing the family but stopped seeing other people or whatever. I mean, some people have been going to church. Like, some people are pretty happy not to see other people, and I sort of have to tread lightly in this area. It's like, if someone comes to me as a client and they like never see anyone, but also they think they're fine with it, but also they're like anxious.
Right.
On the one hand, it's just I have some blog posts about this. I'll find it in a minute. So I have some blog posts where I basically argue like people sort of think they're too special, in that like they think that, okay, for normie, it's like good to see your friends every week and like go to church and work 9 to 5 or whatever. But like, I am some peculiar creature such that what's really good for me is to like stay up till 4 a.m. and never see anyone, and like, lift weights outside naked once a week, and also keto, like just all these weird things. And it's not that it's like impossible that the weird things are good for you, but if you're in doubt, just the statistically like sound thing to do is to assume that you're more like a baseline human than like a total weirdo. So if someone comes to me and they never see anyone and they're like, think they're okay with it, but they're also anxious.
Right.
It feels incumbent on me to suggest that perhaps something that's contributing to their anxiety is that they never see other humans.
Right.
At the same time,
reasonable.
Yeah, it's like sort of just the prior for like, is someone fundamentally okay not seeing other people like on a long-term basis? It's against that. It's not impossible to be like that, but it's very it tends to be like somewhat self-serving or like delusional to assume very strongly against those things like out of the gate. But at the same time, like when I work with a client, like they're just one person, it's just me and them. I'm not worrying about like what's good for people or whatever. I'm trying to use that as like a point of information for this one person who is my client and who I'm speaking with right now. And that's sort of, at the end of the day, what matters.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I would like to understand at some point, I'm like sort of writing this as a mental note, something like the history of therapy like things. There's a lot I'd like to understand. I think Freud has some writing, like Freud and Jung, writing about how psychology is taking the place of religion as like a source of, like sort of like psychological feedback. And I want to know, I mean, there's a kind of mythical fake past, but then there's the actual past. And I want to know what's the actual past of what different things have existed and how people get oriented. Because I guess because we're talking about this, it's like norms get mixed in, right? Like, I don't know, like that lady saying, hey, don't feel too sad because of your baby. It's like a well-intentioned thing, but it's also just totally mixed up in somebody's assumptions and these social ideas about like what people should be like, where the not interacting with anybody person who thinks that that's not the issue. I can imagine somebody for whom it's not an issue, but like you said, it sounds rare. But then some part of my brain is like, what about hermits? Like what about like monks and stuff? So I don't know. Oyster says psychiatrists have kind of taken the place of priests and witch doctors. They shy away from the philosophical and metaphysical aspects. Yeah, no, true that hermits are not normal. I mean, what's normal anyway? What's normal anyway?
I think there are people who can't feel their own anxiety. To this question up there, like it may be an instance in the class of things which is alexithymia, which I'm probably mispronouncing. Alexithymia is basically just like this inability to name and label one's own emotions. So it's not like a psychological diagnosis, but it's like a feature of other things. Like some people on the spectrum have this, some people who aren't on the spectrum have this. And I've actually had a good handful of clients for whom this is the term for it, emotional granularity. So emotional granularity is the idea that that you have some like repertoire, like a vocabulary for emotion. And the very most basic, I mean, like my son is not even 2 and he'll come up to me and he'll say, I was sad. I sort of was like tempted to tweet about it or something, you know, like a little tongue in cheek, like my 2-year-old son has better grasp on his emotional life than some of you people. But
you do, yeah.
But so you start with happy and sad, right? Like positive and negative.
Yeah.
And the vectors are usually like, so there's positive and negative, which is like happy and sad, and then there's also sort of like high arousal, low arousal. Because you can be low arousal happy. Low arousal happy is like contentment or something, and high arousal happy is like ecstasy, right?
Right.
So you get like a 2x2. And some people just have this incredibly nuanced view of what's in those quadrants. And some people have like almost no handle on what's in those quadrants. And I mean, yeah, social science is a dumpster fire, replication, etc. But there's some like empirical, but also just like armchair reason to believe that if you have higher emotional granularity, that this could only benefit you in terms of like narrativizing your life and sort of understanding what to do when. If all you have to work with is happy and sad, then you're going to have like very rough views of what's going on and what you could do about it. So anyway, I think emotional granularity is something that you probably have a disposition for, depending on things like if you're introspective, if you're neurotic, if you have like high verbal fluency, stuff like that. But I also think it's like learnable, like many things, and that you can learn it by doing things like, okay, I thought about my dead dad and like I was sad, but like what kind of sad was it? You know, was I sort of like dejected? Was I melancholy? You know, was I like lamenting it all again?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can print a big list of emotions. Like this won't hurt you. You just pull it out and you think, you know, and you see if there's something weird about your body. Like maybe you feel sick in your stomach, or maybe you have like a headache or something like that. And you try to integrate like what's going on. And that can inform sort of choices. It can inform if you're trying to figure out what you really like want to do or what you feel about something. The granularity is a skill to deploy in the service of that.
I like that phrase, that term. I mean, it's interesting because when I do one of the introspective techniques I use is basically describing sensations and then iterating on the detail in the description. So it's like, I feel, like you're saying, I feel sad, and it's like, why? It's like, well, what does that sadness feel like physically or whatever? It's like there's a hole in my chest. It's like, okay, what's the hole? Like, I don't know. It's like an oval, and you're like, is it really like an oval? Well, it's kind of like a bent oval, and it's kind of sharp. You know, like sometimes people can go and get these descriptors, and I find it ultra useful for myself. Which is, I guess, another dimension to the granularity. It's like feeling it in the moment and stuff. But I like the idea of like, you can imagine like a scorecard. It's like, which of these can you identify or something like that? And there's like 50. Maybe that's too many. That's a whole lot. People. Yes, kind of like generalist focusing for sure. Maybe says, in the context of my research, I talk about how brain implants that assist or take over our emotional regulation could tank our emotional granularity and give us alexithymia. Alexithymia. We better hope we're saying this word right.
When I was still on OkCupid, there was a guy in New York whose username was ℙ𝕙𝕚𝕚𝕦𝕚𝕚.
Uh-huh.
And I went on one date with him. He was like a grad student at Rutgers or something, and he like did experiments on mice, and he said that a bunch of women on OkCupid like had a problem with mice experiments because they were like ethically opposed, but they were like not vegans or anything, so I don't know. It was kind of funny, but yeah, it was a boring date. I didn't see him again.
Yeah. Well, with that, we have kind of gotten to our 3-hour point. But if there's anything else we should hit, we've somehow found ourselves in this very cloudy place. But I don't know. Is there anything else that we should cover? And I mean, this will go on YouTube, and I'll definitely link your whatever link you want to send over for your coaching practice.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to leave us with, or if anybody in chat has a question you've been holding on to? Otherwise, we can call it here. But I'll pass it to you for a final word or question or something like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to diverge to the chat. Oh, how do I solve my life? Oh my God. I mean, is your life a problem?
Dangerous question.
I can't see things not like nuanced. I've seen this message a few times recently. So the idea is that, okay, you get all these messages from like pop culture and self-help and blah, 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 that like you have XYZ problems and you should do ABC things to fix them, right? And the impression you're left with over time is that you yourself are like a big problem and you need to like get solved. And so the narrative move is like, no, you're not a problem, right? Like you yourself are not a problem. You don't need to be solved. I think this is a message in the vein of like, you are enough, right? Which is one of these things is like, oh, diet culture tells you you're not enough. And like mom culture tells you you're not enough, but like you are enough. And I sort of just like, on the one hand, I get these back and forth. Like, I don't think it's good for anyone to feel like they're just like a walking problem. But like, you probably have some problems. They're probably partially solvable. Like, should I really try to talk you out of that? Maybe you're sort of enough. Maybe in some ways you're like clearly not enough for the things you're trying to do. Like, how does denying that help you? You know, some of these mantras, I don't know, again, replication crisis, but like there's some evidence that suggests that like mantras actually draw people's attention to how much they aren't true, right? Like enchanting, I am enough, I am not a problem. Right? Like your brain is like putting its firepower on like, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. Anyway, so that's what I sort of hear when it's like solve my life. On the one hand, I hear like, I want to say that you are not a problem thing. Or, like you're probably in many ways like fine. You have like local problems. You have like local choices. But in another way, some people's problems are pretty big. Some are pretty pervasive. Like that's truth. I can't deny that. No one has any taste for nuance. This is why marketing, the kind of thing that I'm doing is hard, right? Like, how are you supposed to tell people, like, send me money, and I may or may not come up with any solutions for you. I may or may not make you any happier. I may or may not break any ground on your existential difficulties. I may or may not think that it's within your power to affect this thing. Like it's sort of like a very specific market.
I like it. I like that angle. It has a good, like, I'm not saying guru in a bad way. It has a good guru energy to me, but to me the good version is like martial arts teacher. It's like, I don't know. It's like you will not be perfect when you leave the dojo. Like, we're not solving your problems. We're what I don't know. I'm bullshitting around it. Soren said, "I'm surprised you actually answered my purposely bad question," and I thought you did a damn good job. And also, just because W showed up a little later, he says, "Not really fair because it's about something you already talked about. But when I jumped in, you were talking about people managing creative projects while not really being equipped for it, and I'm curious what the bullet points of that were."
Oh my gosh, when were we talking about creative projects? We probably were.
Early. I mean, I don't know if you have a soundbite on that you can drop now. What did you say? You were saying people. Well, I will try to reflect it back, and you can correct me. What
Sure.
I heard was something like people swirl in a chaos of many different hypotheses that they're all kind of not really testing it all at once. I like this, I don't like this, I'm good at this, I'm not good at this. This would be fulfilling, this would not. And then I was understanding that one of your approaches is to make these concrete and attach them to real tests. Like, let's try I don't know how you would actually structure it, but if I were to make one up, it was like, let's try for 30 days to have you actually do that type of art you think maybe you should do that you haven't done for 8 years, but is still nagging you.
Right.
That was one thing you said.
Yeah. So the idea would be that instead of having the creative thing like live in your head, right? Like, you have to find a way to actually try it and or actually reintegrate it or pick it back up or whatever. And some people are avoiding that because the answer might be you don't actually want to do this, or you can't actually do this in a way that you wish you could, or whatever. And that's painful, but it's not as painful of a realization as just having the same or thoughts for the rest of your life about how like you woulda, shoulda, coulda done that creative thing more. So yeah, this is like, the shit or get off the pot school of desire incubation, right? It's like, well, either we're going to find some way for you to do a bit of it, and that's going to be imperfect or whatever, but we'll find the way, or you're going to have to actually deliberately like transform this from something that hangs over your head into something that you set aside, right? Sometimes the setting aside can also be temporary. Like, sometimes people's decision is like, I really liked doing my oddball sport, but like I had a baby last week and I just can't do this for 1 year. It's like, okay, mark your calendar. Like, then when it comes up, it's like an idle thought instead of like deciding every day whether you should do it when the answer is still the same.
Totally. Oh yeah, now I'm remembering the one thing we didn't mention is the email coaching.
Oh yeah.
Maybe just leave us with tell us a bit about what that is, and then we can.
Yeah. So almost actually over a year and a half ago, when my practice was new, I sort of just like put up a blog post that was like, I have this idea that coaching by email is useful for some use cases. If you want it, like, send me $100 and I'll talk to you by email for a while. And since then, I've done probably like it's got to be over 50 client months of coaching by email. And coaching by email is sort of like an unorthodox thing. Like, there are life coaches of all these different flavors, like they're coactive or whatever, and they will try to tell you like you can't have a meaningful relationship with someone this way. And like, I just think that's false. I think it's false that you can't have a meaningful relationship with someone asynchronously or like over text. It's just like obviously false. So I started doing this, and it's good for a couple of use cases. So some people email with me because they like my vibe, they like my blog posts, they think that I'm like smart enough or whatever, but they don't want to talk to someone. They don't want to like talk to a stranger on a Zoom for whatever reason. Like, that's cool. Some people are they actually, like, depending on where you are in your writing practice personally, some people feel that they're more clear in writing than speaking out loud. So like we could hop on a Zoom, but they would explain themselves less well by their assessment verbally than they might do in writing. So asynchronous gives them an opportunity to kind of like get it careful on the paper, on the email. Coaching by email is also good for some people too who like need me to check in like midweek about like, did you do your thing? And there's no reason to like have a big long call that's like, did you do your thing? I can just send them an email. It's like, you said you were going to write 500 words by now or whatever, like, did you do it? So that's just sort of like a practical use case. So I've been offering coaching by email for a while, and it's mostly been really good for people. The only failure mode is like someone thinks that they want to write about their stuff. It's something like emotionally heavy, and so they start procrastinating, and then they feel guilty because the time is going by and they're paying for it. And like I email them, I'm like, hey, did you answer my thing? And then they like, sort of like just the ordinary like procrastination fell off the wagon, whatever. That's happened a few times, but for the right candidates and like the right subject matter, it's really worked pretty well. And it's good for me because I can do that work asynchronously too. So when I had less childcare, I could do it like at night or whatever. So I won't say I don't think I invented coaching by email, but I think that it's the type of thing that, like all these gatekeepers, right? Like they have like coaching credentials or whatever. They're like, you can't do that. It's like, neener. You absolutely can.
Watch me.
Yeah. I mean, people ask me this too, even like sort of free-spirited people, they'll be like, is it legal? Like, is it legal for you to like talk to people for money? And I want to be charitable about this. I don't think that it's like that they're actually like secret bootlickers or something. Instead, they think that the government like outlaws practically everything. So why wouldn't they have outlawed this?
Right.
But it's like, I'm not very political anymore, but like the anarchist core of uncredentialed coaching, philosophical consultation, or whatever is this. It's that two adults have decided to talk, and one of them wants to get the time of the other more than the other way around. So they send money, and then you talk. And like, I can't make you do anything. I can't make you think anything. It's just like an opportunity for a conversation. We're free people, that's free. And that's sort of like at the heart of what I do. When you work with people who are like fundamentally well, instead of fundamentally like labeled and boxed and medicalized as mentally ill, this is what it allows you to do. It allows you to say like, I'm approaching this as if like, I don't have to be ultra careful about what I suggest to you because I know that on the other end of this conversation is like a free autonomous adult who's like exercising agency in what they decide to take from this and what they set aside.
Hell yeah, dude. I love it. I love that framing of it. We're just two people trying to have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's totally good. All right. Well, we did the thing. Thank you, Pamela, for coming on.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm glad this finally worked out.
Yeah, no, for people who don't know, we were like every week we were punting it forward by a week, but that worked. It worked out. Thanks for coming on, chat. You're always amazing, even when you're trolling me. It's all good. I like the questions. I like having everybody come by and seeing people from Twitter and everything. So it's always a great time. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll call this here. And thank you again, Pamela.
Thanks. Good night.